Hello, everyone in YouTube land, and welcome back to another edition of the aptly titled Damn Fool Idealistic live stream. And I think we got a couple people in. If anybody can pop in and let me know if I'm visible and audible, so that way I know I'm not talking to a brick wall. I hope everybody liked the thumbnail. I'm trying to get better at making custom thumbnails. Hey, Ronald, how are you? Thanks for dropping in. Let me know if I'm audible. And hey, Melinda, how's it going? Hey, Elvin. I'm glad to see everybody got the notification. I saw a brick wall on TV once. If I ever even see brick wall or hear of one, I instantly am thinking about protecting myself from a bunch of creepy space children, all with blonde hair and blue eyes. Village of the Damned reference there. Cool. Good to know the notices are working. And I was just saying, I'm trying to get better at making custom thumbnails, so at least it's not just me pulling silly faces. Oh, yeah, another brick in the wall. Some Floyd there. Yep. Alrighty. Good to know. I'm all up and going. And oh, cool. Oh, Garrick's in the house. Hey, man. Oh, just saw Never Say Never Again for the first time recently. Yeah, it's a bit of a strange beast, so I think it'll be a fun talk. And I just rewatched it. I rewatch it at least once a year or so, and it's got a really interesting history, and just it's kind of fascinating to look at. Uh, hey, Pete. Yeah, my name is Pete. James Pete. Yeah. No, it's fine. I grew up with can't remember. I think it may have been on the Sega Genesis. There was the knockoff game with the pun name called James Pond, and you played as essentially a fish in a tuxedo. So it was like a cross between a platformer. I think it was like Echo the Dolphin, where it was like underwater as well, but it was totally had the spy vibe and it was spoofing Bond. But yeah, that was the silliest one I remember as a kid. I'm like, that's not James Bond. This is ridiculous. Why would somebody do that? I was too young to see the humor in it, of course. But yeah, that's the silliest one I've ever heard. Let's see. I do have a number of new additions and pickups, so I guess I'll do these first, and then we'll get into the discussion about Connery's $52,000 toupee, that's actually true. Sometimes I prefer to Never Say Never Again simply by his toupee. I did have one local Laserdisc pickup, and this one was a welcome surprise. It's not common at all, but it is the MGM UA release of the Warner Brothers film, because of course this was still when the Warner Library was coming out under MGM UA, but of the Warner adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream with the all-star Warner cast, most notably Jimmy Cagney. And as strange as it sounds to hear Jimmy Cagney doing Shakespearean dialogue, it actually works and is further proof that even all of the great stars were really great actors and they don't get the credit for it. But this was probably most famous for being the film that Olivia de Havilland was really brought to Warner Brothers to do, because she had been doing Shakespeare on the stage. And this is the film why she really was brought to Warner Brothers in the first place. But by the time they made this film, they had already put her in other films, and she was then essentially a Warner contract player. So a bit like how Bogart was brought over essentially to do The Petrified Forest at the insistence of Leslie Howard. It's got a fantastic gatefold, and unlike a lot of MGM discs from this time period, it actually has this really nice liner note piece, and of course it has their typical, hang on, it's hard to do backwards trying to look at what you're doing, but it's got their typical use of vintage stills that are all pastel tinted, but it looks really good on this gatefold. Like, I am extremely impressed by this. And again, on the rear, you get this nice custom border that sort of looks very theatrical and fancy. So this is a really, really nice title. And I know Warner finally put it out on DVD. I think it's a standalone, or there might be a box set with this and a couple others, but I don't think it's really cleaned up probably much more than this Laserdisc transfer. But I haven't seen this film in ages, so this will be fun to rewatch. And of course, it has a digital mono track. But this was a nice local find, and it was only 95 cents. So that made my wallet very happy. Let's see. Yeah, I know that was the other thing. Yeah, Olivia de Havilland just turned 103 yesterday. It's absolutely amazing. and of course, nowadays she's just about the only one left of the golden age of Hollywood who's still alive and very much kicking. And she still occasionally will do interviews and things. And I've always loved her to death, and I think everybody does. So I don't think there's anybody who really doesn't like Olivia de Havilland. Well, perhaps maybe Joan Fontaine didn't like her that much because the two sisters notoriously did not get along very well. But outside of her sister, I think everybody loves her to death. But yeah, it's amazing she's 103 because so many people didn't really get past their 50s, 60s, 70s even. So, but of course, she did start at a younger age compared to a lot of the other people in the golden age. But still, just to have anybody left and somebody who was a major name then is just like astounding. Oh wow, Melinda got a Grail. Oh, awesome. Yeah, now awaiting the USPS lottery. Oh man. Yeah, hopefully the person you got it from knows about proper packaging. And of course, now it being the hot summer months, it's fun to see your packages. Well, not so fun to think about your packages being on the back of a mail truck for a while and being transported around. So hopefully they know how to insulate the box well and keep the disc protected. And I know somebody on the group just posted a picture. They finally got their first disc that was cracked in the mail. So I actually got a book on eBay I've been wanting to read for some time. And of course, with film books, they're so expensive. I usually have to wait till I find a cheap used copy or read it in a library. And I took a chance. It was from one of those big mass booksellers, and they just shipped it in like one of those little tiny plastic bags. And it got here as a paperback. It was just like completely mushed. It had stains on the spine, and the whole spine was just mushed like this. So it looked like it had been dropped in the ocean or something and then dried out. But it was just because it had been like completely smashed by the postal service. So it definitely was not in the very good shape they promised. So I mean, at least it's a cheap readable copy, but I still have to get another one to replace it. So the USPS Lotto, I mean, USPS is still pretty good. And UPS and FedEx, for all the bad stuff you hear, I really haven't had that much of an issue outside of a couple things, but it's usually, bad seller packaging. The hardest thing, of course, is shipping a Laserdisc player. There, you just take everything into your own hands, and if you double box it, because the internals are so jittery that especially if you're shipping like cross country, some of the players I've gotten, it's had to ship from a couple states away, and I'm just like waiting with bated breath, and stuff can get knocked off track simply because even with fragile on it, it's still a big box on the back of a truck. um, Let's see. Oh, cool. Ronald got the complete Mr. Bean set. Okay. I didn't realize they had done a complete one. I saw a bit of Mr. Bean when I was growing up, but I've never seen the whole series. I will admit, actually, probably my favorite Rowan Atkinson thing ever is his Nigel Smallfaucet and Never Say Never Again. I love that character. I love the way he performs it. It's so goofy, but it just hits the right buttons for me. I still love love all of the little gags. Um, and take all Kita. Wait, no, what was it? It's take advantage of the natural cover. Oh yes, yes. Oh. So that's why you shouted my name across the harbor. Did I? Damn, damn. This just cracks me up. Let's see. Oh wow! So it was Thomas Crown Affair. That is fantastic. I know that is stupendously rare. I gave up the thought of even ever finding one. So I've got the Blu-ray of the remake. I guess we're talking about, and I think I have the DVD too. I think I got the DVD first and then found the Blu-ray. But yeah, I know the Laserdisc is a super late release, and it is a pretty good remake. I think it actually improves in ways on the original, because the original 1968 film, I mean, even Norman Jewison, the director, would tell you it's an exercise in style over substance. And I love that movie to death. I saw it when I was a kid at a very young age and just immediately fell in love with the style of it. But every time I go back to it, it's not like there's a whole lot of story material going on there. So I think it was a good choice for something to be remade by intelligent people. And I need to rewatch it, but I remember it holds up pretty well. And anytime you get to see Brosnan and his Bond tenure outside of the franchise, it was like he got to really open up, I think. So he came across really well in it too. So I'm glad you finally found one. I don't even know. I think that those go for like a super crazy amount. Um, yeah, quick, sign Olivia de Havilland up for a movie or show. Yeah, yeah, and of course, yeah, as you mentioned, Pete Kirk is still alive and kicking, and I don't know if any of you guys have ever read any of his memoirs. He's written several books, and they're all really, really well written. So I would definitely recommend those. And you know, even though he had his stroke, which I think it was sometime in the 90s, maybe, or early 2000s. I can't remember. So even with a pretty debilitating stroke, he's still, you know, still alive and kicking, and you know, still shows up and makes a few public appearances here and there. So that's really cool that, you know, we have at least two who are still with us. And actually reminds me, this week I haven't gotten it yet because I'm not part of the Disney movie club, and it's unfortunately a DMC exclusive release. But Disney has finally put out the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea restoration, and all the reviews so far are good. It has lossless DTS 5.1 HDMA. So it's the restored soundtrack we all read about back in 2011, because Disney sat on it for 8 years. But they also say they fixed the CinemaScope mumps by scanning the full negative and then performing like a digital squeeze. So all the characters no longer have the fat mump faces. So that's going to be really interesting. Of course, the version that popped up on iTunes had teal coloring all over it. So I was kind of afraid that this one was going to be that way. So I'm just waiting for some screenshots and some more detailed reviews. But of course, it's locked behind the movie club. So you have to join up and order a ton of discs, or pay an exorbitant fee for a copy from somebody else. But I'm just glad it's actually out. But what I didn't realize is it doesn't have any of the old extras. It's just a movie only disc. So you'll have to hang on to the DVD and the Laserdisc to have all of the various extras. And the DVD has a lot of good ones and has a commentary. So I don't know why Disney does that. It's like if they're going to do these at all, they put them out in the movie club most of the time with lossy audio, and then just forget all the extras. So got to make it interesting for us somehow and keep us buying more copies. Oh, hey Metro, how's it going? Thanks for dropping in. Let's see. Make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, the Mr. Bean set is less than 16 US. Man, that's pretty substantial for a whole series. It's kind of surprising how many shows you can actually get for a decent price, and how many even movie box sets, really, especially if they're DVD exclusive. It may take a little while to track one down, but there's usually a couple things that pop up if you're diligent enough to try and find a cheaper copy. It's only when like a DVD was made like pretty late on. Like I know I was talking on the one of the last streams, I picked up season 2 of Maverick, and that was only released in like 2013. And Warner put out the first 2 seasons, and so they're still pretty expensive. And then they switched over to being manufactured on demand. So those were all special order and expensive. So I had to look around for a copy of season 1, and I finally found one on eBay. But even that was a little bit pricey because, of course, it wasn't made until 2012. But stuff that was made in, say, 2005, when DVD was huge, they printed more copies, and you can get stuff for literally nothing. Like I was talking last time, I got the whole Superman Ultimate Collector's tin for literally $5 shipped, which is still mind-boggling. But it's like people have just totally forgotten that DVD exists, except for the fact that most people still buy DVDs more than anything. But they just buy it, stick it on the shelves, use a digital copy, or they just buy favorite films at Walmart or Best Buy or something, and then just buy the DVD copy. Because the vast majority of people, don't really care about HD outside of seemingly having HD streaming. So, but yeah, there's a lot of bargains, especially in DVD. And then musically, the bargain is, of course, CDs. CDs are everywhere and plentiful and cheap as all get out. Let's see. Oh, Johnny English. I know they just came out with the third one, I think, not too long ago, and I don't know if I ever saw all of the second one, but from what I remember, the first one, it had its moments. It was a little bit silly here and there, and obviously it's kind of aimed to cover more of the children's market, or the what they used to refer to as the family entertainment market. So obviously it's not going to get very dark, and it's not going to be very specialized. But I should really rewatch that and check out the sequels, because I, as I said before, I'd love it when he pops up and Never Say Never Again. Yeah, that's right, Gary. Um, but yeah, I need to go back and rewatch that. And yeah, I remember they came out with the third one, so I need to just watch all three. Um, so let's see. Oh wow, Pete found a nice hardcover of Moby Dick for $6. Yeah, book collecting is really fun to do, and then you get to the point where you're collecting too much, and then you have no space. Which I had that happen to me when I was about age 5, and it hasn't ever gotten undone. That actually reminds me, I did have a couple of book pickups. I guess I should go through this since we're talking about books. This one is a book I read in the library, and I always wanted to get a copy of my own because it's absolutely fantastic. But of course, being a film biography, it's got a pretty high price tag. It's like $35 brand new. But I can't recommend this highly enough. This is Patrick McGilligan's biography of Nicholas Ray, entitled "The Glorious Failure of an American Director." This is by far and large one of the best books on film you could ever possibly read. McGilligan has done really outstanding biographies. His biography on Hitchcock, which I think is called A Life in Darkness and Light, is probably the best book on Hitchcock there is. And Nicholas Ray is a super important director who is not talked about enough. And as you can see, they include the famous quote from Jean-Luc Godard that says, "The cinema is Nicholas Ray." But this is a really painstakingly researched book about somebody, who there isn't a whole lot of material out there about, and it really gets into his early life, which hasn't been documented that well, and his various emotional and physical hangups, and then all of the stuff that happened to him in the industry. But easily one of the best film biographies ever written. And McGilligan, whenever he writes a film biography, I mean, he just knocks it out of the park. This one, his book on Hitchcock, he just did a book on the early days of Orson Welles up to Citizen Kane. It's fantastic. His Clint Eastwood one is really great, but it's also quite revealing. So if you're a big Eastwood fan, I don't know if I would recommend that, because he doesn't seem to be that nice of a guy. But again, fantastic book. If you guys haven't read it, check it out from your local library, or grab a copy if you can find it. Yeah, Ronald. I had 1,500 plus books at one point. Yeah, I'm pretty close to that. I think I'm at about 1,000 or so, and I certainly don't have enough space. So, um, let's see. Oh yeah, that's right. Betty White's still with us, Melinda. You are right. Um, yeah, Ronald, DVD is being upstaged and Blu-ray and 4K in terms of all of the promotions and stuff. But still, by sheer numbers, DVD is just still selling like crazy, and it's kind of surprising, because you usually have to go through a lot of trouble to find like the DVD version of like a brand new summer movie, or like a Marvel movie. You'll see the Blu-ray combo pack, the 4K combo pack, and then you have to specifically search for the shelf tag to find the DVD only edition. And people still buy those, so I don't know why. Um, oh man, he's going right for the big question of the night. Would you use Thunderball and Never Say Never Again? Well, that's not really. It's an unfair comparison, because Never Say Never Again is so problematic that it was lucky that we even got a finished film to begin with. So it's Thunderball. There's no contest. But when I grew up, I hated Never Say Never Again because I thought it was terrible. But over the years, I've come to find really good things in it, and some really nice, kind of riffs on the official series by doing some stuff differently. So I mean, it's got good parts, and Connery's of course fantastic, but yeah, it's so compromised by all the various things that were going on. It's got to be Thunderball. Oh yeah, Elvin, you're exactly right about all your digital copies and your if you buy things on digital services, they can be wiped at any time for whatever reason. And people are now finding that out the hard way and getting very upset that, what they buy and is supposed to be theirs can just be deleted whenever. So yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's another reason why physical media cannot be, just simply thrown out the window, because if you do that, you're going to run into so many problems. And then when, stuff doesn't exist, it just doesn't exist. At least if something's out of print, you can spend the time, money, and effort to track down a particular copy. But, in the digital realm, once it's removed and not available, and once they physically remove it from your storage, then, you're just flat out of luck. It's not like, when you get to physically download something to your own external offline hard drive that you purchase, which then, they can't remove. It's the same thing if you buy a digital game and then later on it's taken off or is no longer available. Once you've actually downloaded it, it's on your console, but they remove the ability to purchase it again online, so other people can't purchase it. So there is at least a bit of a difference with that. But yeah, there's a lot of fine print to the streaming services that most people don't pay attention to. So that's another reason why physical media is still the way. Let's see. Oh, hey, A-Track, how's it going? Watching Freaky Friday. Oh man. I guess I should ask. Oh, okay, the 2003 one. I was going to ask which version. Yeah, gosh, I don't think I've seen that since about then. I think I've only seen both versions like one time, but it's a pretty fun concept. So, and Disney seemed to be on a bit of a roll in the early 2000s with their live action, essentially live action tween films. At least they were pushing that particular agenda for a while. So, yeah, yeah. Pete talking about the Oliver Harper review of the Batman 4K UHD. Yeah, it is good that he's actually pointing out the inherent issues. But the only thing I was noticing, he was talking about the teal and the new release. And even though I'm not fully 4K yet, I do know that the UHD, if you go to Capsaholic, you can see the direct screen captures, and the 4K master does not have the overbearing teal issues of the remastered 1080p disc. So in a lot of ways, it's like the Matrix all over again. So I don't know. I'm guessing all of the shots he used in his review were from the 1080p remastered disc. But I know he was talking about he was viewing the 4K with HDR. But according to all of the screen captures and things, the 4K version should be much, much better than the 1080p disc. So that basically makes the 1080p disc a coaster, unfortunately. But it seems that's going to be more and more common as we go along in 4K. Oh yeah, Metro, you are exactly right. Warner announced that they are putting out the original Scooby-Doo series first in a limited box set, which I think it's either September or October. And they've, of course, it's a lot like the Batman animated series where they did the numbered limited edition first with all of the swag. They packaged it in this sort of cardboard mansion with, of course, one of those Funko keychains. And I think it's come down. I think originally it was at like $93. I think it's now down to like $79 or something. But I'm trying to wait and see if they announce like a slimmed down without all the swag version like they did for the Batman animated series set. But it's already, the pre-orders are doing extremely well. And very thankfully, unlike the Scooby-Doo movie set here, where they crammed almost hour-long shows onto 2 discs, they are going to do 4 discs for the set and have a couple new extras. So all of the episodes should have plenty of breathing room. And hopefully we do get a lossless audio track instead of lossy audio like that release. But I'm just amazed it's finally happening. It took them long enough, but I would hope that means we're going to get some really improved picture quality, because those DVDs, they're, even though this is a nice box, they're pretty old authored DVDs, and if you don't watch them on a CRT, due to the way they're encoded, they show visible combing artifacts, which I think that's called the Alchemist method of DVD encoding, where on progressive displays, basically anything but a CRT, you're probably going to see some combing in an animation that really kind of drives me nuts. So if I ever watch these, I watch them on my CRT. Um, A-Track wishes Frozen was banned. Ah, eh, I mean, it's not terrible. I mean, it's not really my thing, but yeah, that soundtrack and the whole Frozen merchandising empire, yeah, that just that was everywhere. Um, so I'm glad that's finally died down. At least I know Frozen 2. I don't think it's already come out, but it's about to come out at some point. Yeah, everything I love is out of print. Yeah. Yeah, well, sometimes that makes the Laserdisc worthwhile. I know there are several things that I wound up picking up on Laserdisc because I knew it was the same transfer, and things like King Solomon's Mines, the Thin Man series. The DVDs went out of print super fast. The Tarzan series went out of print, and for those, you can pick up the Laserdisc sets. They're sometimes a little difficult to find. The Thin Man set you can get for like $10, and instead of paying like upwards of $50 for the DVDs that are the same master, they added a single, I think it's an A&E documentary about Bill Powell and Myrna Loy, and but the Laserdisc same transfer, a really nice little box set from MGM, and better audio with the PCM tracks, and I didn't even pay like I found that in a local shop for like $5.99. So I've watched that every year since. And speaking of that, Warner Archive is doing a 4K remastered Blu-ray of the original Thin Man this year, which is super amazing news. Um, so anyway, the other book pickups I was going to talk about. I don't know if many of you guys are into children's series books, but I kind of got started on it when I was a kid. I started reading the Hardy Boys, and so I've been basically collecting Hardy Boys editions ever since. And I do have a good amount, and a lot of the continuation series. But another series I started reading as a kid, and a really fantastic series that really piqued my interest because it had Alfred Hitchcock's name on it, was the Three Investigators series that was created and written originally by the author Robert Arthur. But they came out with the idea that these three boys would solve crimes in a small California town, and they would give their summations to Alfred Hitchcock himself, and Hitchcock appeared as a character much like he would in the Alfred Hitchcock Presents television shows. But anyway, unfortunately, these only went through one or two print runs, and they're very difficult to find. And so I've been trying to build up a whole series, but you rarely come across them in used bookshops, and you usually go for a good amount on eBay. Like if you look up a complete set, since there's about 43 of them, you can easily pay upwards of $300 to $500. And that's just the going rate. But anyway, I did find one of the paperback reissues of one of the titles. Which I can't remember which number this is in the series, but this is the 1970s reissue of The Mystery of the Shrieking House. And if you've never read any of these are extraordinarily well written. Easily some of the best, one of, if not the best, children's book series. I put it right up there with the Hardy Boys. And even though they did change authors on the Three Investigators eventually, and on the later books, they removed Hitchcock after Hitchcock's death because the series ran into the early 80s. I cannot recommend these highly enough. They all have extremely inventive concepts, plot hooks, and you really can't put one of these down. The characters of the three boys are really well laid out. So really happy to find this one. And then I got really lucky in the, I think these were from about 1989 or so. But around this time, a lot of the children's book series decided they were going to try and appeal to the older market. So the Hardy Boys started the Case File series, where you had the Hardy Boys, fighting terrorists and using guns, and all the titles had words like murder and death and corruption in them. And it was not the Hardy Boy stories that kids grew up on, and so a lot of grown up adult Hardy Boys fans kind of reviled them. But I found them as a kid, and it was like seeing the Hardy Boys in like a really gritty R-rated canon film from the late 80s or something. So imagine like a Hardy Boys story that was like the tonality of like Lethal Weapon 2, if that makes any sense. So they tried it with the Three Investigators because they were trying to get the series popular again because it had been pretty much over for a couple years. But these are incredibly rare. I think they only did 11 of these. But I found most of these Three Investigators Crime Busters books in the local bookshop, and these usually go for about 15 to sometimes $30 each. So finding these in a local bookshop was amazing. So here is book 3, entitled Rough Stuff, and these are very inspired by the Hardy Boys Case Files books. They're same design, they have a cheesy tagline, and they're the same size of paperback. So a lot of fans of the Three Investigators don't really like these that much like Hardy Boys fans are not fans of the case files, but I've only gotten to read one of these before, so I'm kind of excited to check out the rest of these. But as I said before, these are incredibly rare. They only had one printing run in 1989, 1990, and then the series was canceled after book 11. So finding all of these in one bookshop is pretty amazing. I've only managed to find one of these before, so now I'm only missing one of the 11. So this was the part of my Three Investigators bookshelf that I thought I would never finish, but now I'm only one away. So that's pretty cool. And again, I can't emphasize more that these were hugely influenced by the Hardy Boys Case File series, which, again, if you guys haven't read those and you grew up on the Hardy Boys, those are great fun. They read like a dark 80s action thriller that just happens to star two teenagers instead of, Chuck Norris or Charles Bronson or Mel Gibson or somebody. Yeah, Ronald, I think I'm missing number 10 of these Crime Busters books. Actually, I take that back. I'm missing 2. I'm missing number 1 and number 10 so far. But yeah, Pete, they're fantastic. I found them when I was a kid in the library because I see a book in a school library. It was rather old, but it was book 3. Had Alfred Hitchcock's name on it, and the title was so suggestive, The Mystery of the Whispering Mummy. And I just could not put it down. I think I read it 10 times in 1 week. And so whenever I find any of them, I just get so excited. I've read a good number of the original books because I would read whatever ones I could find in libraries, but it's very rarely that I actually find them in used bookshops. And then the original hardcovers lasted for most of the series. Those are the most collectible ones. So you see those go on eBay for a very substantial amount, especially for the first printings. So I'm just really focusing on trying to get the main paperback line because the paperbacks go through the whole series. The hardbacks stop about 3/4 of the way through, and it's a lot cheaper to do. Yeah, they do. They've been doing the reprints of the Hardys and Nancy Drew. They kept reprinting the ones that had the original, well, not original, but the 1960s era art of the original books that are usually called the canon, because that one label retained the rights to the original books. And they've been reprinting the ones with the plastic covers for years. And then recently, about a year or 2 ago, they stopped doing that and they started reissuing them with this updated artwork. And I mean, I'm just happy to see them still in print. And yeah, they usually pop up at like Costco, Sam's Club, things like that. When I was a kid, I got one of the, it was called the Hardy Boys Starter Set, and it was like 10 of the plastic cover ones that I got as a birthday present. And it was super exciting because it was just 10 individual volumes, but they were shrink wrapped together and they had like a special sticker on it. It wasn't like a box or anything. But yeah, it's cool to at least see they're in print and to know they're still being read. But it's still a goal of mine to read all of the original Hardy Boys texts of the original unedited versions because most people aren't aware, but the first 38 volumes were rewritten in the late 1950s to early 60s. Sometimes these stories were completely changed, and the only thing that was left was the title. And then, of course, there's multiple cover art variations for different books. And then some were, of course, the original books were hardbacks with dust jackets. And those are the most valuable and the hardest to find, and especially with dust jackets in good shape. So I have a good collection of various various editions. And my goal, well, I should say my very unobtainable goal one day is to have both of original and revised text, and then all the cover art variations for each book. So I'm nowhere near being done with that yet, but that's what I'm shooting for eventually. But I don't do a lot of children's book series, but these are the two, because I grew up with them, and I just wanted to have at least all of the versions of the various stories to be able to reread, and I'm still not done yet. So children's book collecting is really hard, especially looking around in used bookshops, because it's usually, books tucked in the back corner behind some kids' toys and things like that. If you're digging through thrift sales trying to find various editions or texts or cover artwork differences and stuff, and most people are, only going to be interested in, adult literature technically. So you get a lot of weird looks when you're the one adult guy digging through children's books because you're looking for Hardy Boys and Three Investigators editions, and then you have to explain to people, and then they're like, "Oh, you mean there's multiple editions?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I got hooked early. Let's see, catching up on some of these. Oh yeah, the only issue with the Batman animated series Blu-rays is they didn't include the original Tim Curry Joker audition tape. Yeah, oh man, that'd be fantastic. Uh, I know he was also considered for Batman '89, but I don't think it was very seriously because they were hell bent on getting Jack Nicholson. The other name they touted around was Robin Williams, and they kind of used him in a power play in the negotiations with Jack, so that made him kind of justifiably upset. So I know that was the reason why he didn't exactly want to do Forever, but was probably going to be open to it had Tim Burton's Batman 3 actually come around as intended. I think there's a couple clips of Tim Curry doing Joker on YouTube. I guess it's from like a bootleg of that audition tape. But if I remember correctly, the network said that they didn't want Tim Curry because he was quote unquote too scary. And I'm like, well, what did you expect, guys? I mean, he could have done Joker in any guise in any adaptation and just completely knocked it out of the ballpark. It still amazes me that he never did Joker in any way, shape, or form outside of almost playing Joker like 3 or 4 times. Oh, Metro found the Ninja Turtles 1990 Laserdisc with the full cover. Okay, I guess instead of the one that's just got the Image Entertainment disc, where it's got the fake laser disc on the sides and the black cover. That's cool. I didn't know I had a full cover one. Yeah, I mean, I've kind of gotten used to the Image jackets, but yeah, they're kind of cheesy and unimpressive when you first look at them. Oh yeah, Ronald. Oh gosh, I haven't seen Riley Ace of Spies in too long. I need to rewatch that, and I think I've heard of the Sharp series, but I don't think I've seen it. So I'm really remiss in some of my spy thriller watching. There's some like Riley Ace of Spies that I've been wanting to rewatch for years. That and the original Edge of Darkness that Martin Campbell made for BBC, and a lot of the stuff in there is very evident in what eventually showed up in Goldeneye, for example. But yeah, and plus I always like to eventually go back and rewatch a lot of the '60s spy craze stuff, the good and the bad. Just because sometimes you need to rewatch both Flint films, But yeah, yeah, can do a live stream on them because it's awesome '80s trashiness. Yeah. Uh, oh yeah, yeah. Three Investigators Book One, Secret of Terra Castle. Yeah, it's not exactly the Psycho House, but it's very reminiscent of it. And again, just the plot synopsis, like the setup of the story, is definitely several cuts above your typical children's book. The Terror Castle of the title was basically built and lived in by an eccentric silent movie star, much in the mold of Lon Chaney Sr., who specialized in horror roles. And so he disappeared and apparently died under mysterious circumstances many years before. And according to his wills, the house had to sit there, and it's literally built to be a castle filled with trapdoors and all kinds of horrors to terrify people, because apparently he was a practical joker. And so the three investigators basically go to check it out, and the reason why is, and this is what introduces Hitchcock to the series in general, is Hitchcock says he's looking for a location for his next film, the scarier the better. And so, because this place is reminiscent of the Psycho House, the boys decide to check it out and find out, more information about it to try and win the contest. And again, all of the stuff is intrinsic to the story and setting up the series. And like I said before, it's definitely several cuts above the typical, what passed for children's literature, especially back then. And as big of a fan of the Hardy Boys as I am, I can totally understand when people say that the Three Investigators series was better written than the equivalent revised Hardy Boys text of the 1960s. So yeah, it's also really cool for Hitchcock fans, even though it doesn't really tie into Hitchcock's films. It's really cool to see the Hitchcock mystique and the Hitchcock persona from a different standpoint. And again, once you read one of them, it's wonderful literature for any age. So yeah, and it really sucks that they have never been reprinted. So oh yeah, I was going to say, and of course they're still huge in Germany because they still publish new stories in German every year, and they did 2 German movies over there a couple years ago. So it's one of those things where it's started here in the States, really kind of trailed off, and is still super popular in foreign countries. Just like the Phantom is still popular in Australia and I think Sweden, and some other countries in Europe as well. And if you try to talk about the Phantom here, outside of maybe a comic convention, no one is going to know what the hell you're talking about. And the Three Investigators even less so. But yeah, they're still huge in Germany. Oh yeah, yeah. Even though Tim never got to do the Joker, yeah, I agree. Jack is really a force to be reckoned with in '89, and I mean, Mark Hamill's Joker. I mean, it's just you don't even have to you don't even have to explain. I think most people know by now. It's just definitive. It's just every shading of Joker, every aspect of Joker, every part of the Joker's manic, insane personality can turn up in any one of Mark's readings of Joker. It's still incredible to think that all of this is coming out of Luke Skywalker. But it just goes to preview that the great voice actors are really almost invisible. You forget who exactly is doing the performance. You just get so wrapped up in it. Other pickups before I forget, as I am want to do sometimes. Since we mentioned it earlier, I know I talked about last week, I did pick up 2 of the Batman 4Ks, and they did finally get here. So here is the Batman '89 4K. And I will admit, as silly as this cover does look, it is much better on the actual printing, and they've given it sort of a holographic sheen to it. So, of course, it reflects back in the light. And when you get one with the slipcover, it has the matching spine to go along with the others. So it admittedly, it's better than we all thought from the original online mock-ups. But yeah, unfortunately, no original audio, and the 1080p remastered disc is super tealy. Not completely horribly so, like it could be. Like, it's not as bad as it could be, but it's so bad I'm never going to watch it. But I'm now future-proof with the 4K transfer, and I will have to remix the Laserdisc audio to match it, because I have sampled the '89 remix for myself in 7.1 on the 1080p disc, and it's god-awful. I can't stand it. Like, I thought it was terrible on the YouTube clips that people had posted, but it's just, it feels so out of place. It's just, yeah. So basically, I just picked this up to have on hand, and I'm going to get the other 2. But the deal I got on these, they were just so cheap, I couldn't say no, and it's still going to be cheaper than getting the box set, which doesn't come out until September, because the geniuses at Warner Brothers were like, yeah, we won't release the box set until September, and we'll still charge full price. So, So I'm going to try and wait until I can find the other 2 on sale, because, as I said, I'm not really going to watch these all that much. I'm still going to stick to my older copies for now. But I did also pick up the Batman Forever 4K. And again, matching slipcover. And again, it does look better in your hand, but it's still just kind of slapped together and not very good. But at least when they sit on the shelves, the spines look pretty good, and they all go together. Just the rear. So the rear matches, and again, it's okay, but you do have more and more stuff kind of crammed into the jacket because they have to talk about 4K, they have to talk about UHD, they have to talk about Atmos, they have to talk about more and more stuff, and that leaves less space for text and photos. And then the discs are, of course, the same. They've gone for the same design on all of these, just with a different color for each. So, I mean, it's okay, but it's not very inspired. Yeah, I'd say this is actually a step backwards from the image collages that were on the discs of the special edition DVDs and the Blu-rays. But you know, at least they have a theme. Most places, most studios will just issue discs with just, you know, a plain font, if anything, these days. So, and again, I was going to wait for the box set, but I just saw a listing on the Blu-ray.com trading forums that had a bunch of 4K titles, and you know, if you bought 2 or more, the seller gave a discount. So I was able to get both of these for less than $15 each. So that was a no-brainer, because they didn't have he just used the digital copies, and I don't use those anyway. So that was a no-brainer. So I at least picked those 2 up, and I'm going to get the other 2 when I can, when they go on sale. But yeah, it's we're all hoping that they do like a second pressing of discs with the original mix. And yeah, I should say that again. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to watch the whole thing, but I did sample a couple places. Forever does have changes in the audio. It is a remix, and the original mix is not included on here, so it's the same same thing. Again, I haven't got to do a 100% test, so it seems like the 5.1 backup track on here was a remix, but I will have to really double check to make sure. But there are some differences I already noticed in the 7.1 Atmos mix of Forever. So what everybody's saying about the sequels is true. They are also remixed, but it's not to the egregious level of 89 with the brand new effects all over the place. Oh, wow. Just Ronald just picked up the wooden box edition of the 15 film Sharp series for only $10. Wow, man, that is phenomenal. I'll have to look that up when we get done. That's nothing for 15 films. Wow. Um, oh man, personal favorite Scooby-Doo villain. Oh man, that is hard. I don't know if I could pick just one. I kind of love them all. And yeah, the Black Knight is great, and you know, is ostensibly, you know, the original baddie because he was in the first episode. I don't know. I like several because you know, I mean, I can't do impressions of them. I wish I could, but I love the ones with the great laughs, like the kooky ghost from Haunted Isle, even though it's just, you know, obviously the floating bedsheet ghost. I just thought his laugh was so iconic. Same thing with the space kook and the with the flaming red skull that does the jittering crazy laugh in the spacesuit. Um, I love them all. I couldn't really pick just one. Then there's the creeper that just, you know, walks around and says his name and is a riff on Frankenstein's creature. Um, it's so many different ones. I always love the I'm blanking on the name, but the headless ghost that wanders around in the fancy dress in the antebellum mansion holding the candle, you know. And then the design they did for Mr. Hyde is really good. I love the Android episode. I love them all. I can't pick just one. Pretty much all of the villains from the original series, even the second season episodes that weren't as good, they still had great villains. Oh gosh, yes, Captain Cutler, Headless Spectre. That's it. Yeah, I love them all. I can't pick just one. And then my youngest sister was super Scooby obsessed when she was growing up, so I pretty much rewatched the original series like countless times. So we all got to the point where we would just do impressions of the whole gang and situations just all the time, especially in situations that didn't call for it. So this is going to be really exciting to see what the Blu-rays look like. Oh, got the laser disc of those magnificent men and their flying machines. That's pretty cool. I don't know. That one is letterboxed, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure it probably is. But yeah, I have never seen that one. I think I've seen it on the database before, but I haven't seen that in a long time. It's got to be a fun watch on Laserdisc. Um, let's see. Oh yeah, I've got two more. This one I've talked about it. I have been dying for it to get here, and it finally got here. So I could finally talk about the Warner Archive release of Jonny Quest. And this thing is literally worth its weight in gold. It's that good. I am just stunned at the quality of these episodes. I haven't got to watch all 26 episodes yet, but I mean, I never thought this would come to Blu-ray, so this has been a complete surprise. And despite all the trouble of trying to get a copy, and they were just overloaded with demand, a lot of people's pre-orders got canceled. I mean, this is just phenomenal. The disc, it's spread across 3 discs, so there's plenty of bitrate space. But each disc is actually labeled with the individual episodes. Let me try and get a little closer so you can see. So as you can see, each disc is labeled with all of the episodes on each particular disc, which never happens on most releases these days. So even though there's no insert, you can easily find which episode you're looking for. And again, it's spread across 3 discs with lossless audio and a fantastic encode. And this absolutely destroys the main studio label release of the Scooby-Doo movies, which, as I said before, crammed everything onto 2 discs with lossy audio. No extras that are brand new. It just ports over all of the DVD extras, which admittedly there weren't a whole lot, but and you do lose the nice fold-out packaging of the DVD that I've shown before. But for the price, it retails for $29.99, which for an entire classic series is pretty darn cheap. But the 1080p remaster on this is phenomenal. This literally jumps off your screen. And most importantly, I shall show you here, there's this little disclaimer that says this is intended for the adult collector. It may be too much for children. What that means is this has finally been presented uncut with the correct opening and closing credits for each episode. And the 3 lines that were censored from the DVD are in fact present and back. And it's fantastic to see them back. I remember reading about the censoring, and everybody was kind of in an uproar about it when the DVD came out. So I didn't get the DVD until maybe a year or 2 ago because I finally wanted to rewatch the series, and I never realized that it was only really 3 lines they were talking about. But it's also the idea of censoring it, and those 3 lines are not. I mean, they're not like ostensibly like super offensive or bad or anything. And one is admittedly, maybe a joke that's not in such good taste, but it's also just a one-liner. But then the other 2, when taken out of context, do seem, horribly racist. But you also have to keep in mind that at the point in time, they're dealing with a tribe of natives deep in the jungle who are about to have a human sacrifice of Dr. Quest and others. So it's a bit of a life and death struggle. So if you take it in context, it's not quite as objectionable. I don't know if I would have used those exact words that Race Bandon uses in that particular episode, but it's nice to at least finally have them back. Oh yeah, and I still marvel at this series. The first time I saw it, right in the opening credits, it was like I was seeing a comic strip come to life. It's still staggering what they achieved with this in 1964. And you had on-screen deaths, not only in the series, but in the opening titles. So you could definitely tell this was a prime-time animated cartoon. And even though it was still aimed at children, it was shown in prime time, and they made sure it was still, two-fisted enough for adults to enjoy. It is definitely one of the greatest animated series of all time, and one of the crown jewels of anybody's Blu-ray collection. This is absolutely essential. And now it seems like they printed enough copies so you can actually order one and actually not have to wait a couple weeks for it to get to you. Let's see. Oh yeah, Split Second. Yeah, that is an underrated film. I'll have to look it up on Laserdisc. I hadn't realized it was on Laser. Um, Yeah, yeah, Roland, it's 3 discs on this, and the runtime is 572 minutes on Jonny Quest. So it was on 4 DVDs on the DVD set, and it's on 3 Blu-rays, and all 3 are dual layered BD50s. So and it will literally jump off your screen. It's stunning, and I thought the DVDs still held up really well. I've watched them on HD sets upscaled. I've watched them on a CRT. They still look stunning. So for this to be such a big improvement over those DVDs is pretty amazing. And but the big draw is the fact that in addition to the quality, each episode is fully uncut and has the correct opening titles with the Jonny Quest title card. None of that was on the DVDs, and all of the end credits have their correct credits because the DVDs just cut and pasted the same one over and over again. And so a lot of the original creative team was not credited on those. And since we've been stuck with that since like 2004, I never thought it would see Blu-ray, let alone from the Warner Archive. So this is probably my release of the year, actually. The only thing I think is going to come close are some of the classic horrors to be released by Shout Factory this year, and Warner's announcement that the Archive is going to do The Thin Man from a 4K restoration. So I wish I could say it was the Batman 4K, but it is not. That's what I thought it was going to be, but no. Yeah, yeah, Pete, the 4K on 89 is better, but I've had other people confirm for me the original mix is not there. So it would have to be corrected by the studio if they deemed it to be correctable, or just released in the new pressings for the box sets. Um, any seasons of the Flintstones? No, I haven't actually. I've been picking up various Hanna-Barbera when I find them, but because they originally released them in the black DVD volumes, they had a higher price tag than a lot of other DVDs of similar runtimes and stuff. So I was waiting for some to kind of come down in price, and then they stopped selling a lot of them in stores, and then they repackaged them and slimmed them down into other volumes. But I'm kind of trying to hold off because with Jonny Quest and now Scooby-Doo, I think we might see some more Blu-rays of some. So I think Warner Archive may be doing the Jetsons. I think that rumor has been confirmed. So that's another one that I think they'll tackle next because, of course, the original series is pretty short. So it'd be very easy for them to do like Jonny Quest on just a 2 or 3 disc Blu-ray set. And when you think about it, the original retail price of Hanna-Barbera DVD sets were, $30, $40. So the Blu-rays are technically a bit cheaper. And it's not a bad price point for such beautiful quality on those. My last pickup, this was one I'd intended to pick up for some time. The original printing runs of these ran out, so they went out of print, and then Warner Archive started printing them, and you can still get them, but of course they're manufactured on demand, and I don't think they have the nice slip boxes. So these are the first 3 volumes, and then all the later volumes are manufactured on demand anyway. But I finally picked up the TCM Archives Forbidden Hollywood Volume 2. This series, of course, collects the various pre-code titles that Warner Brothers had either done some restoration work on or pulled out of the vaults to add to these collections. And I have Volume 1, and I still need to get Volume 3. And then from Volume 4 onward, I think they're up to Volume 8 or 9 now. They do one every couple of years. But from Volume 4 onward, they're released on the archive as MOD discs. But these first 3 have this really nice packaging that all go together and are in the Warner Brothers slipcase style, which I really miss the slipcases. Like, I don't think disc packaging gets much better than this. But all of these are really awesome, nice pre-code titles that were either before only available on video as the censored versions from old prints that were reissued after the code took effect, or were just not available at all. And as I said, Warner Brothers was doing some restoration work on some of these. So some of these have some pretty extensive cleanup on them, but I've only seen, I think I've seen 2 or 3 of the films on here. There's actually 6, and it does include a little documentary made by TCM back in the day on the pre-code era. So I can't recommend these highly enough if you're at all interested in Hollywood history, or if you're curious to see what a pre-code film looks like. But you can't exactly expect it to be what you could do with something today. But these are really fun, even if the film itself is not particularly a good one. It's really fun to see a pre-code title that is much more open and risque, shall we say. So I think the covers really definitely fit that. And again, volumes 1 through 3 all match with a different color scheme. But really happy to finally find this one. Volume 1's pretty easy to find on eBay, but 2 and 3 are usually a lot more expensive. But of course, you can just pick up the Warner Archive issue if you just want a copy and don't care about it being on MOD disc. Yeah, Warner Archive releases another Blu-ray with no flaws. Yeah, Warner Archive. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the new scans for the Batman films are really good, but it's sad that they're so problematic because if you could just get the source scan without the revisionist color grading and the revisionist audio mixes, then I'd be happy. Um, there's no new extras on them, so it's really just a catalog upgrade. And now that I have 2 of them, they're just gonna go on the shelf and never come back off. I'm still gonna be spending my Laserdisc every year, or I'll watch my special edition DVDs for the extras, and that's usually what I did anyway. But I mean, at least they're out there, so people won't forget they exist. But that means future generations are just going to watch them in these new revisionist 4K transfers. So now I think we can get on to the discussion of the evening. Talk some about Never Say Never Again. So, of course, Never Say Never Again is obviously the 1983 quasi-remake of the Thunderball story. To put it in very simple terms, because otherwise we could be here all night, the original Thunderball project was started as the first screen treatment for a James Bond movie, and it was a collaboration between Ian Fleming, author and creator of the Bond series and the novels, and producer and wannabe Hollywood star, essentially, Kevin McClory, who had been a part of many different productions. He had worked on The African Queen, he had worked on Mike Todd's Around the World in 80 Days, and eventually they hooked up with the screenwriter Jack Whittingham. After a series of failed attempts at figuring out what they wanted to do, Whittingham basically got all their ideas focused and made the first really good draft treatments after what Fleming had tried really hadn't worked because, of course, he was not a trained screenwriter. Eventually, the project kind of stalled, and when Fleming went off to his Jamaica retreat Goldeneye, which he did once a year to write his next Bond novel, he took the abandoned story treatment and turned it into a novel. But of course, did not credit Whittingham or McClory, and then McClory saw an advance copy and sued. This went all the way to the High Court of London, and then eventually they settled out of court, and McClory was awarded the rights to the Thunderball story, the Spectre organization, which is and Ernst Ever Blofeld, all of which are introduced in Thunderball to begin with. And so that left the whole Thunderball story and the Spectre organization pretty much locked off from the Eon official series. They had the rights to all the other books, excluding Casino Royale, which had been sold previously. So when Thunderball came around, originally they wanted to make it as the first film in 1961, but due to the court case, they had to put it off and postpone it. Richard Maybaum even wrote a draft back in 1961 of the purported Thunderball movie. But it was a good thing technically because they had such a low budget to begin with. They needed to pick a smaller story to start with, and Thunderball would have just been too much for a small production to adapt. So that was part of the reason why they chose Dr. No, and it was a good thing, even though it wasn't what they intended. In 1965, after Goldfinger's success, they struck a deal with McClory to do a one-off of the Thunderball production, and he was given the producer credit. That's why Broccoli and Saltzman are listed as executive producers, and McClory is listed as producer and actually has a cameo with his wife during the casino sequence in Nassau. But part of the proviso of the Thunderball deal was McClory couldn't do anything with his Bond rights for another 10 years. So they thought, well, this will give us enough time, and this whole thing will probably have died out in 10 years, so we'll be fine. 10 years go by. 1975 rolls around. McClory announces he has a new Bond project. He's going to try and get Sean Connery, and it's going to be called Warhead. And this became a perennial nightmare for Cubby Broccoli, who, of course, was still producing the series. His partnership with Saltzman had broken up in 1974 during The Man with the Golden Gun. It had been rocky for a good number of years. but Saltzman eventually sold his shares to United Artists, so Broccoli was left with the studio as the sole producer. Building up to The Spy Who Loved Me, which came out in 1977, that was pretty much the make or break point for the series continuing. So McClory saying that he was going to make his rival James Bond film right when Broccoli was literally betting the farm on keeping the series going was not really helpful. So eventually, the Warhead or Warhead 75, because it was 1975, script kind of fizzled out. And McClory kept working at it and working at it over the years. We'd always announce stuff that never came to fruition. But anyway, as I said before, it kind of drove Cubby Broccoli crazy for a good number of years. So anyway, this finally came to full fruition when Jack Schwartzman, who had been I think he'd been an agent and a number of other things in the industry, really decided he wanted to get into feature film producing. Somehow either met or got wind of McClory and his rights, and talked with the various legal departments and found out that they technically could do this one story and be legally covered. So he struck a deal and got McClory to agree to let him produce it, and got the whole thing set up at Warner Brothers, who handled distribution. And of course, Warner Brothers was pleased because essentially they were going to get a Bond film for free, and not have to do any of the work. And so anyway, this is what led to Never Say Never Again coming out in 1983. This is why it's pretty much limited to being a Thunderball remake. And this is also distilling the whole long-winded story down as much as I can, with still keeping in all of the relevant parts. And then after this happened, the legal battles kept going for years and years and years until just a few years ago, when the McClory estate, because McClory has long since passed, finally settled with the Broccoli's and Eon Productions, and that's what finally allowed the Blofeld character in the Spectre organization to come back in Bond 24. Although I really wish that it hadn't, because Spectre was horrible. Anyway, that aside, that's sort of the backstory of Never Say Never Again. But then the actual production did not go very well. Irvin Kershner came in to direct. This was, right hot off the heels after Empire Strikes Back. They got Douglas Slocum to shoot it, and this was right after Raiders of the Lost Ark. They managed to get Connery back. Connery had creative input. He was a de facto producer on the film. And he really wanted to do something with it and, not just waste the opportunity. It took him a lot of convincing. And of course, the film's title was provided by his then wife, because they couldn't think of the title. And since he had famously said he would never play Bond again after coming back the one time for Diamonds Are Forever, his wife suggested calling it Never Say Never Again, and the title stuck. So I really do like the title. At first, it seems really kind of cheesy, but especially when you know the reasons why and where what the genesis of the title was, and the fact that Connery said he would never come back to the role, it does kind of fit. And of course, all of the ad campaigns were built around the stills of Connery with that beautiful half smile, holding the gun and the tuxedo. So people thought they knew what they were going to get, and ostensibly everybody thought they could just make a Bond film like the real series. But of course, they couldn't do that, because then they'd be hit with 10,000 lawsuits, because Cubby Broccoli was not about to let somebody technically do a variant of what was essentially his baby and what had become his life's work, which he would be very justified in doing, and he'd be right in doing so. So what I really like in the film are all of the elements that are more directly drawn from Fleming's novels, where they do things differently as a departure from what's done in the original series, and then the occasional sort of winking joke they make at the series, such as the M and Never Say Never Again being a politically minded sort of useless twat, or and Bond being older and kind of being put out to pasture and not being sent out on missions and just being made to do paperwork and training exercises. Bond actually drives his Bentley like he does in the novels. He's much older. He's much more grizzled, and Connery's performance really revels in that. Unfortunately, there's not enough of that. It's really kind of fleeting. But my personal favorite joke is the obligatory Q Lab scene. Even though Q is technically not the character in the novels that he is in the films, So there's a couple instances where they probably could have gotten them into court for what eventually showed up in the film. But I think they eventually got to the point of, well, they're just going to go ahead, so let bygones be bygones, and we'll just do it better. Um, but the Q scene in Never Say Never Again, which you really have to have, they do a send up because they have Q in a basement freezing laboratory. He's under equipped, he's underfunded, his sinuses are running because it's so freezing down there. All of his whole workshop is dirty, and he's just like, I hate this place. I would defect to the CIA in a minute if they gave me the offer, you know. And it's just totally not the Q that you expect. It's not the Q's lab we're all used to, and it's my favorite sort of winking in joke at the official series in the whole film. Um, so there are good things in this film, but it's primarily Connery's performance that holds the whole thing together because the production was extraordinarily troubled. They were doing rewrites day by day on the set. It was not a pleasant experience for anybody. Connery was miserable, but he was also a producer on the film, so you know he was just determined to just get the darn thing done, essentially. And I think if it hadn't been for his continual drive and Kirshner trying to get the film finished, along with everybody else, I don't think we would have ever gotten a finished product, or it would have just been completely incoherent. When most people talk about it, they talk about things like, oh, they don't like the score because it's this strange jazz hybrid score by Michel Legrand. Admittedly, the first time you hear it, it's very weird because the whole film experience is like a Bond film that's not a Bond film. Um, but I've come to really appreciate the score over the years. I really like certain parts of it. And then, yes, there are some parts that do not really befit a standard Bond film. And it's like they basically ignored the if John Barry had a playbook for scoring a Bond film, because he did score 11 of them, you know, it's basically like they just completely ignored that. Which is good because if they had copied any of that or had any semblance of the James Bond theme, the Eon probably would have hit them with a lawsuit faster than they could blink. But I do like parts of the Legrand score, and everybody's just kind of slagged on it for so long that I mean, I don't think it's that bad at all. I think some parts are rather cheesy and some parts really don't work, but you know, there are some parts that are really good. I particularly love the it's used about 2 or 3 times in the film, but it's a slow little piano riff. It's this melody that's used for transitional scenes. Most notably when Bond arrives at Shrublands in the old Bentley, and you know he's of course feeling his age, and he's been sent to the Health Farm to eliminate free radicals because his body is out of shape, and you know he's really feeling his age. And he pulls up, and the doorman admires the Bentley, but says they don't make them like this anymore. And Bond talks about it being still in good shape, but he's also referring to himself because he is essentially an older relic of a bygone era in the early '80s. So it's stuff like that that I really like in the film, and I really love that that melody that plays in that scene and pops up in the film later on. But the plot is very scattershot. It's very unfocused. It really is very slowly, very leisurely paced. And the first 5 or 10 times I saw it, I mean, I really hated it at first as a kid. And they would run it in the Bond marathons a lot of times with the official films, which I hated because it's not an official film. And you know, eventually MGM got the video rights, and then eventually Eon and MGM got the film Lock, Stock, and Barrel. Um, but you know, originally it was under Warner Brothers, so it was not part of the official series at all. But it's taken me a lot of time over the years to really get used to the internal weird rhythm of Never Say Never Again, and I now actually I do like most of it. I'm okay with most of it, but it's very lackluster. Like the whole climax is very low key. I do like the Tears of Allah set and setting. I do like that, you know, Bond is very, you know, having to use his wits, and he's very two-fisted, and he's a much older character, and there's not a lot of gadgets being used. The best parts in the film are, of course, the character interplay with there are good actors in the cast. The best performance besides Connery is bar none given by Klaus Maria Brandauer as the new revamped version of Largo. I mean, that characterization is a film in and of itself. They've recast Largo as this, you know, multimillionaire industrialist, very, you know, of the '80s time period. but just his look, his demeanor, and the complete unhinged performance that Brandauer gives really underpins um, the emotional context of the love triangle that comes between Bond, Largo, and Domino. And it's much more played up than it is in the 65 Thunderball. But it is a completely different characterization for Largo, and Brandauer gives a phenomenal performance. I know Connery and other people really wanted to get him. They wanted a good, serious European actor to play the villain role. And I think that choice, along with Connery really trying his darndest to carry the film. I think that's what makes it work. And the scenes they have together, which admittedly are not enough, really make the film work. The best whole moment in the whole film for me is the domination sequence, which takes place in the casino. Of course, that replaces the typical casino or first villain showdown where Bond basically shows him up on his own turf. But they give it the spin of having the card game replaced by the video game of Largo's own, devising. And even though it's technically dated because they show a casino full of arcade cabinets because it was during the arcade heyday, it's a really interesting sequence. It's got great sound design, great special effects because they're playing, with a practical table. But of course, the game effects wouldn't have been there on the set. But that whole sequence is beautifully staged. It could easily come out of a Bond continuation novel of the 1980s because those still followed in the wake of the Fleming novels. They didn't really follow from the films. So you could easily picture that. And it actually is sort of in a way similar to some of the John Gardner novels of the 80s, which those are underrated. I'd say the first 5 or 6 books he wrote are very, very good. And the later ones do have their moments, even though they aren't as good as the first ones he wrote. But that's the best scene in the film for me. And the interplay between Bond and Largo is spot on. And you get to see the Bond's psychological manipulation of Largo, which is one of his great talents that has not gone into enough. People merely talk about, Bond versus the villain or a great villain or Bond's luck with the ladies, but they ignore the fact that he is a psychological operator, and that is a key part of being an espionage agent or being an intelligence man. Um, and then a lot of the little gags are really great simply because of the way that Connery plays them so well and the way he plays with the scenes in a manner like he did in the earlier Eon films. But you do see flashes of that charm and sparkle that he and Terrence Young really kind of established on Doctor No. It's not there all the time, but when it does pop up, it's really special. And I think that's what a lot of the critics latched onto when they gave it good and glowing reviews in 1983. They were just like, "Oh, Connery's back. The magic is back. It's fantastic." And I'm like, "We're not seeing the same picture, are we?" But um, so yeah, it's taken me a long while though. So I've come to expect all this stuff in the film, and now I kind of more actively watch it because I know it so well. But yeah, the first couple watches is very, very strange. It's basically what somebody in the industry thinks a Bond film is, and that's got all the elements they think is what makes a Bond film special and successful, but they really don't understand what a Bond film is. That's how I look at Never Say Never Again. It's a lot better than you'd expect, but I don't think it necessarily holds up very well all these years later. It's still got a lot of sequences that don't exactly work. And again, it was such a trouble production and it was so heavily rewritten day by day. I think it's kind of a miracle we have as good of a picture as we do. Um, and yeah, Pete, you're exactly right. Connor is in very good shape for his age. When I was younger, I used to think he actually looked better in Never Say Never Again than he did in Diamonds Are Forever. But I think part of that is due to the hairstyling because it's a little weird, his toupee and his hair in Diamonds Are Forever. It was like they hadn't really gotten a handle on, making up Connery 2, 3 years down the road because, as we age, our looks change, but especially for actors. And especially in consecutive series roles. Like if you look at Roger Moore through all the films, um, first couple films he appears pretty similar, but you can even see, his hairstyle changes a little bit, his wardrobe changes a little bit on The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker, and then For Your Eyes Only, his hairstyle changes completely. It changes a little more on Octopussy, and then he looks very much different in A View to a Kill. And even though it's just, consecutively 2, 3 years down the road for each one, actors look totally different in some. So in Diamonds Are Forever, Connery looks very different. So I think they spent a very long while getting it just right for Never Say Never Again, because he is much older in '83. And again, they spent $52,000 on his toupee, which, I mean, that sounds like an absurd amount, but I don't exactly go expensive custom made toupee shopping. And it was an important prop since technically it adorns all of the ad campaign, all of the posters, and it's very important because Connery is the main draw of the film. So it's important that he has a full condensing head of hair. Um, if we get on to negative stuff, there is a lot of it, but constructively speaking, I think they play the Fatima Blush character too much for the sort of cartoony, over the top villain. But I still do like it as a different characterization than what we got with Fiona Volte. And I do like Barbara Carrera's performance. I just wish they hadn't pitched it so far over the top the whole time. I do like Max von Sydow as Blofeld, although he's barely in the film. Uh, the Spectre organization is pictured a bit more like it is in the Thunderball novel, much more business-like than the appearances we get in the '65 Thunderball. Um, and yeah, Kim Basinger's performance is not very good, and I think that would be obvious to most anybody. She was a very young actress at the time, and I don't think she had the requisite experience for this film, and it really shows. But once you see this film 10, 15, 20 times, you eventually get used to it. And when I was a kid, I couldn't stand her performances in this film and Batman '89. So it took me a long while before I was able to actually see her in things and take it seriously. And instead of just being like, oh gosh, what's the line? I want a soft drink. I'll have a double Bloody Mary with plenty of Worcestershire sauce, and do all the deer in the headlight looks like, because there's a lot of those in Never Say Never Again. Um, and it's a tough character to play because the Domino character is still relatively similar in both adaptations. And even though they were still dubbing actresses by the time of Thunderball, I still really love Claudine Augier in Thunderball, and she looks stunning, and she gives one of my favorite performances of any of the Bond actresses. So that's really kind of tough to come after, and it's not very well. It's not a very it's a very subdued part in Never Say Never Again in comparison. So it doesn't really do her any favors, but is definitely the weak link of the main performances in Never Say Never Again. Um, some of the set pieces are really good. The bit with the sharks and the radio-controlled homing beacon that's stuck on Bond's scuba tank underwater when he's diving through the wreck. That's all done for real with all practical effects and real sharks, and that sequence still holds up. That's good. Even though it's pretty short, the motorbike chase is okay. Again, done with a real motorbike with a rocket strapped to the back of it, and Connery in a tux with a motorcycle helmet. I mean, it kind of sells itself. Um, I think the opticals they did, there's very few of them in the film, but none of them were very convincing. The big one being the stealing of the bombs. Instead of just being hijacking the Vulcan bomber in the original, it's updated to the flying rockets that carry atomic warheads, and that whole sequence is just an optical. But I mean, it's a bit dodgy, but it moves by so fast, and it's a technical updating that I can live with it. Um, the production design for this film is not super great. The photography surprisingly isn't either. It's very contrasty. Of course, this could also be a product of some of the video transfers, but it's very contrasty. A lot of the sets do look like sets. Some are very good, like the casino, the Tears of Allah at the end. The flying saucer is pretty good. I especially love the Largo's command room that has the spinnable wall, so then he can peep on his mistress in her dance studio. It's like, who comes up with stuff like that? But it also gives insight to Largo's messed up psyche, so I really enjoy that. And then later on, Bond is able to use that against Largo, so I do enjoy that. but then, like all the scenes on the airbase at the beginning, it's the some of the sets really do look like sets, and then there's a lot of practical location shooting. The whole film does have an element of being low key. You don't get the globe-trotting flavor of the Eon films at all. And while that can work in some ways by getting sort of a more back to basics approach, which I am totally on board with, it just doesn't really work, and it just has this feeling of drabness to it. Um, it's similar in a way in that that's what happened on License to Kill because they had the lower budget. They shot in Mexico. They had to build their own sound stages and things, and it sort of has a more contrasty look. But even there, I think they were able to keep enough exotic flavor to not make it feel so drab. Whereas Never Say Never Again, because it's not the official team working on it and it's outside guys and they had so much stuff going on, it really does have a drabness to it. It is very dated in a lot of ways. Um, I was just rewatching it again recently, and I found myself thinking, I think this film is actually more dated than Thunderball is because even though Thunderball's from 1965, you're not sitting there thinking the whole time going, "Wow, that's such a great 1965 boat," or "Look at those awesome 60s sunglasses," or "That's such a weird looking 60s hotel lobby." Whereas in Never Say Never Again, you're like, oh man, I haven't seen that type of carpet since like that's like 80s carpet, or that's like the paint you'd see in a lobby in the 80s, and it's just so drab that you find yourself noticing stuff like that. Um, Catch up on some comments. Yeah, Connery pretty much went from I don't know if Longest Day was. I guess it was shooting before, or I don't know if it was before or after Doctor No, but it was around the same time period. And I guess he would have went from one right to the other, but I don't know how the production schedules lined up. Um, yeah, shout out to Rowan Atkinson's Oscar-winning performance and Never Say Never Again. Nigel Smallfaucet. You're going to jeopardize the tourist trade, Mr. Bond. We can't have you just going around killing people. I love that bureaucrat character. I love him so much. I could watch a whole 2-hour film about that character. It's so goofy in all the right ways. He's got a little bit of Clouseau clumsiness, but he's so stiff upper lip, British, useless diplomat, and all he cares about is his little desk and promoting the tourist trade. And then he was so good they reprise him at the end, and I'm so happy because I could just watch that character for ages. It's one of the highlights of the whole film, and Connery has a ball playing with him because he probably thought it was a great idea to get Atkinson in there, and I'm sure they probably improvised a lot of that due to all the rewrites and the way that Connery's Bond plays off this complete twit. You can just see him like biting his lip almost not to just laugh at, just like, and sort of, it's sort of a mirroring of the Bond M relationship, the Edward Fox M. And Edward Fox is a great actor, and I think he could have played M seriously, but it takes a great actor to play that sort of foppish version of M, and to do it so straight that the lines can come across and not be just completely ludicrous. It's like, um, what's the line? And if you pull this off, Bond, I'd like to offer you lunch at my club. That's what kept me going, Shaw. um, so yeah, but I absolutely love Nigel Smallfaucet, especially when he first introduces himself after shouting across the concourse. He's like, "Hey, I thought since you were one of those secret chaps, I should try and find you secretly." And then he introduces himself with Fawcett, Nigel Smallfaucet, because he's trying to be so secretive, failing so miserably. Oh, let's see. Yeah, you just think it's just me, or Connery looked like he's aged really badly in 4 years. Yeah, it's I think it's all down due to makeup and hairstyling, and if you're talking about diamonds, especially because at that point Connery had already done some films without his toupee, and he was really changing his whole look. Like if you look at his film with Sidney Lumet, The Anderson Tapes from the same year, that was done on the United Artists deal that he made for Diamonds Are Forever, the large fee and getting to make 2 films of his choice. He does that film without his toupee, and he has the sort of different look that he has in Diamonds Are Forever, but it's much rougher around the edges, and he's playing basically a complete loser of a character, and not the suave, polished Bond. So it's interesting to see that era of Connery. He's starting to play around with his image because he's still trying to not be typecast. And yeah, it is a different look in Diamonds, and it's a different look in Never Say Never Again. And I think they had to pay a lot of attention to that to try and nail down what they wanted to do and make much older Connery, look appropriate. Because of course they were going up against Octopussy, which everybody eventually called the Battle of the Bonds because they both came out almost at the same time in 1983. If I remember correctly, Octopussy beat Never Say Never Again to the punch a little bit, I think by a month or two, and both did relatively well at the box office, but eventually Octopussy did outstrip Never Say Never Again, which really deservedly it should have, because trying to compare the two, it's literally comparing a worn out, watered down imitation to the original. It really does both a disservice to compare them because they are two different things. And while there are a lot of things that I do actually like in Never Say Never Again, and there are some things in Octopussy that I'm not really as fond of, and it does have some issues of its own. Octopussy is still a great film, where Never Say Never Again is a problematic film. So that's where they separate for sure. Um, Gary thought Largo's video game challenge was pretty hilarious. No, man, the stakes are pretty high. When have you ever played a video game that will literally give you painful electric shocks until you give up? I was thinking about that again, and I'm like, what would that even feel like? Like, would it start to burn the flesh on your hands when you start getting to like 85% pain level like they're getting? And then, but I love how Bond manipulates it, and the second time he allows himself to be thrown to the floor to mess with Largo before betting on the final match for the rest of the world. I like the concept of the game. It's basically like military strategy, but put in a video game scenario. So I think it was a good way of updating the classic casino meetup without just doing that over again and updating it for the video game craze of the early 80s. And I think the optical effects work in that scene is great because, again, you got to think about it. All they have is a table with 2 guys sitting there with handles doing like this, and it had to look really silly on the set because you have Sean Connery probably like, what the hell am I doing? Oh, let me move this here and it gave me a shock. I think, was that the cue? I lost my place. So, and you have to rely on their facial reactions and the fact that it's just 2 guys flapping sticks around when there's nothing there, obviously. I also really like the sound effects. I love the computerized voice. I can't even do it right, but it was welcome to play for the domination of the entire world. It's also very dark because it's not like when you're playing a game of Risk, it's still a board game, and it's not literally talking about the complete and utter domination of the world. And it's also got strategy baked into. I just love the whole sequence. I was weirded out the first time I saw it as a kid. I'm like, Bond playing a video game? This is strange. And then the more and more I think about it, I'm like, why can't I play Domination? Like, just can we turn the shocking part off? Like, I'd like to play it just to try it. It looks cool. We need to remove the electroshock part because that's probably going to have a lot of lawsuits due to angry parents having their kids have burned hands and stuff. But it'd be fun to be actually able to play it. But of course, I am a big arcade geek, so anything that's at all of the arcade era or looks or sounds like it, I'm interested to play. So I don't know, maybe I'm the only one that actually wanted to play Domination. Like, you could go and play it in an arcade, and it just has 2 handles and has like Klaus Maria Brandauer on one side and Connery on the other, and like a animated, beautiful drawing on the side panel, and like has like little arcadeized versions of their faces. Even if it's just vector graphics, it would have been pretty cool. Because of course they have the arcade cabinets in the other part of the casino, and you never think you'd see Connery in front of a Centipede or Dig Dug, or I think when he says the famous line, which is not delivered well at all, that's another problem. The famous James Bond line, is just like thrown away, and the line reading is always seems so bad. Connery is like leaning over a gauntlet machine, like, "My name is Bond, James Bond." And I'm like, no, you can't do it like that. Like, you have to put some effort into it, and it's just like, I wish they'd at least just like ADR that one reading or something if they were going to use that, because it's just like, why did we even do that? Like, we could have just skipped that. It just bothers me so much every time. Um, but I mean, it's still cool, and I do love the shot later on where they show, Largo like looking at Bond and Domino, and he's, totally being played by Bond, and he doesn't like the fact they're having a relationship, and it really messes with his ego. But he's framed right behind the side panel of a centipede cabinet, so it's showing him in the white dinner jacket and everything, looking so suave and everything, when in actuality, he's much more like the giant centipede monster on the side of the centipede cabinet. So it's a bit of duality and framing that I really, really love. I mean, it's not exactly subtle, but it's just a shot I really like, and that always sticks out to me. So at least there's that. And again, it's Bond with arcade cabinets. I mean, it's like it doesn't get a lot better than that for me. Even though the real Bond character would, probably hate them, especially in a casino. It would, offend his uh, sensibilities, but still, it's pretty interesting to see a bunch of classic arcade cabinets in a grand casino. So, um, well, Pete's talking about that he says, Roger Moore may have not have been an accurate Bond per se, but excellent in his own way. I I mean, it's like a different approach, really, but I think the core is still there. And of course, the film Bond is different from the book Bond, but I think the core of the character and the persona is in all of the Roger performances, even though it does start to vary. But if you look at the first two films, especially, the performance that he gives is a lot darker. And then in The Man with the Golden Gun, he actually comes across as legitimately pissed off, and I really enjoyed that. It's not very evident in the film, but if you look, Bond is ostensibly pissed off because he's basically become a walking target. So he has to intercept and find Scaramanga before he can ever possibly get back to doing his day job, which of course comes back to the film later. But he's very annoyed at the beginning. And even though the film's kind of relaxed into his more alternative persona, the core of the character I think is still there. And I think what you're saying about his charisma and screen presence is also true, absolutely. But I don't think he ever lost sight of the core of the character and the fact that these were supposed to be played straight. A key example would be an Octopussy, which of course came out the same year as Never Say Never Again, when the entire film suddenly hinges and changes from being a sort of lighthearted, rompish adventure in an old-fashioned way in the first half, and it's at the reveal of the warhead that's then supposed to be smuggled into the circus on the American airbase. The whole tone of the film changes, and when Bond has the confrontation with General Orlov in the train car, it is completely deadly serious, and Roger is on point against Steven Berkoff, who is a very strong actor, and both of them are just sparking off of each other, and it is totally different from the entire film that has preceded it. And it shows that Roger was capable of doing that, and there is a seriousness in all of his films, even when there is sort of the wink, wink, nudge, nudge at the audience. It's never explicit. It's very much implied. Like if you think back to even the pre-titles of Octopussy, there are several moments that are very they're not really played up, but they're done with just enough humor. Like, for example, Bond is walking into the military base disguised as Colonel Toro, and he's walking past the guards, and it's not a very good disguise, and they're running against a clock. But Bond still takes the time after he passes one of the soldiers to berate him for his uniform not being just right, to just give that extra air of being some uptight military leader. Even though he should have just walked through because he just has a glue-on mustache glued on, But it's little tiny touches like that I think really really made those films work. But yeah, I think a lot of people really have never taken more seriously as an actor, and he was very self-deprecating throughout his life. But I think he was a much better actor than anyone, or perhaps even himself, ever gave himself credit for. And you can even see it in other films. Like there's even a small bit in Cannonball Run, and his character is a rich, well, he's the son of rich industrialists who has become obsessed with the idea that he is in fact Roger Moore. And he has this one scene with his purported mother, who, if I remember correctly, she's like extremely Jewish, and she's like, what are you doing to yourself? Like, this is stupid. You have to stop this charade. And he's all, kind of acting goofy and silly, and he's like, but nada, da 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 da. But then all of a sudden, he goes into this sort of Bond persona, but he does it absolutely straight, and it's like seeing the switch being flipped. So I think you could point to that one particular scene, even though it's in a comedy that's not really related to the Bond films at all, but you can just see that switch being flipped, and he is just deadly serious right there, and it's in the Cannonball Run of all things. So yeah, so for all we talk about Connery's presence being the big draw for Never Say Never Again, Moore's presence is a big draw in Octopussy, but he also has the strengths of the rest of the production to go along with that. So even though, by that point, Roger was kind of carrying the series on his back with the successes he had had prior, it wasn't, him literally having to carry it by himself. And he still gives a great performance, even though, like Connery, he was getting on up there in years. Um, so that's sort of where I've come to on Never Say Never Again. And if anybody else has any more stuff to chime in with, please, by all means. And I'll talk a little bit about the video history of the film. I don't have all the issues, but I have most of the major ones. Of course, it came out on VHS tape first and Betamax, and it was handled by Warner Brothers because it was a Warner Brothers film. And then it came out on a pan and scan Laserdisc, which I believe was also analog only sound. Of course, this being a scope film, the pan and scan is not really desirable at all. Eventually, in I believe this was 1995, Warner Brothers here in the States finally did a widescreen Laserdisc shown here, using pretty much the most iconic still of Connery, which was used on all of the ad campaigns. I just sort of made this new collage, which, I mean, it looks okay, but it's very plain looking. I wish they had just done the poster. This is still in the shrink wrap, so I'm trying to show it without getting all the glare on it. But the more you watch this particular copy and the more you look at this cover, it does kind of work, and it is actually getting the film finally in widescreen, and the little widescreen banner is right here. So Warner actually put it on the front cover for a change. The rear is pretty standard. Film spread across three sides. Side 3 is CAV encoded, so at least you get that nice addition. And the transfer is pretty darn good. Again, the film is not the most visually appealing, but this is a fine Laserdisc. It doesn't have a lot of issues or anything, and it's a little bit more difficult to find, but you can actually find one of these for about $10 or less. I'd say the big draw is probably the PCM audio, the digital tracks, the film's original Dolby Stereo mix. And when you matrix it back out, it sounds pretty good. But I would like to talk a minute about the film mix. I talked a little bit about the photography earlier, but the film mix for this film is not very good. It's very dull. When there's nothing going on, a lot of the dialogue scenes are almost very mono. There's very little surround activity. It's only in some of the big music cues and some of the ending finale with some of the gunfire going on, and like a little bit during like the motorcycle chase. The most surround activity you get in the whole film is when the rocket jets are flying around with the warheads, and they're all the twisting scenes through the clouds and stuff, and they just zoom by things. But other than that, that's the most active the surrounds will get. Of course, it's a mono surround matrix back out. I do believe this got 70mm blow-up prints, but it would have been from the same 4-track master, and I don't know if they showed those too many times, but it and Octopussy both got 70mm blow-up prints. Anyway, so this is the edition you'll want to seek out on Laserdisc, and I'd argue it's the best sounding audio release, even though the audio mix itself is not very good from a sound design point. especially when compared to Octopussy. Octopussy has a very good Dolby Stereo track, and it absolutely wipes the floor of both photography and sound design compared to Never Say Never Again. So that is another big point in Octopussy's favor. Now, eventually, Warner passed on the rights to MGM, and they first put out a DVD and a VHS tape, actually, with this new revised cover art. So here's the MGM DVD. I'm sure a lot of you are pretty familiar with this because this is pretty widely available. This particular DVD, I think, came out in 2000. So this was right before and coinciding with the special edition DVDs. It's the same master pretty much as the Laserdisc. I think the color is a bit bumped up in saturation, but otherwise it's exactly the same. I can't remember if this is anamorphically enhanced or not, but this is the original pressing, so it has the booklet. And as you can see, it's very much done in the special edition style in terms of being a photo collage. Let me show you the... And it's the same style as the SE booklets. So you get a little bit of text, and all the MGM booklets are really well done. They may tell you stuff you don't already know from like the film's Wikipedia page, but for the time, it was really nice. And eventually, their booklets are usually only in the first pressings of DVDs. So if you pick up used copies or even copies in box sets, they usually don't have the booklets. For example, the Man with No Name MGM DVDs all have booklets at first, and I only have the booklet for one of them because I only have the very first DVD pressing for a few dollars more. So they eventually got rid of these. So it's kind of hard to find these with the booklet still with them. Also, I should point out, like the special edition DVDs, certain pressing runs of this disc did have some issues. There were 1 or 2 lines that were cut out of the original pressing on DVD, so you had to get a corrected copy. It basically, if I remember correctly, it misses the scene, which I actually love, and I can't believe this happened. It misses the scene of the guard outside the casino that Bond puts in the locker and tells him that his cigarette case actually has a bomb in it. And then later on, he comes to pick up his cigarette case and just says, "Thanks very much." So if I remember correctly, the first pressing of this on DVD, that I think the tag end of that scene was missing, and 1 or 2 lines of dialogue were missing. And if you remember collecting the SE DVDs to begin with, some titles like On Her Majesty's Secret Service were missing a line, and some of the others, I think Octopussy was missing the printed in subtitles, and so they did some corrected runs of those, but you'll still commonly find the original uncorrected copies floating around. If I'm remembering correctly, I do believe this copy is correct. I just picked it up with the other special edition DVDs when I was trying to complete the set, and since I was just trying to get the various versions of this film. And then shortly thereafter picking up the DVD finally, but a long time afterwards, in 2009, they finally did a, I mean, it's not really a new master, it looks very similar, but it's cleaned up a little bit, and the color's not as saturated, but they made the new collector's edition, which first came out on DVD. It's got a new revamped, very modernized, not very colorful cover, but this actually has some new extras with Stephen J. Rubin and Irvin Kershner doing a commentary, which, I mean, it does run full length. You do hear a bit more about the production, so that is very helpful to learn more about it. And here's the new disc art. So, I mean, it's okay art for a modernized release. It's not terrible, but I mean, this film's never really had good art to begin with, but I mean, it's okay. And then here's the rear. And this actually gave the film a 5.1 remix. It does keep the original 2.0 track, and the 5.1 doesn't make any changes, but if I had to choose between the two, and I've admittedly done too many comparisons, I still go with the original 2.0 on the Laserdisc. I think the 2.0 is just a little bit better than the 5.1, but there's not really a whole lot of difference between the two. It's probably more of just my inner purist talking. So anyway, of course, as you guys probably already well know, the Blu-ray came out a short time afterwards and then went out of print pretty quickly, and MGM has never brought this film back into print. So now copies of even this DVD, but especially the Blu-ray, go for a lot of money. And for a while, you could pick up one of these DVD cases that actually had the Blu-ray inside. This came out when they were still doing that, where they would sell Blu-ray DVD combo in DVD packaging, and then like 2 or 3 other variants. But now sellers figured out that the Blu-ray was in there, and so they still sell those for pretty expensive prices now. But it did take me a long while, but eventually I got very lucky and I picked up the Blu-ray on an eBay sale. It was one of those where this is actually the original US copy, and I didn't think I would win it, and I guess people just weren't particularly looking for Never Say Never Again at the time. And so I got this for a very cheap price. So it's just a standard MGM Blu-ray, nothing special about it, but it's got all the extras of the 2009 DVD. I think this also came out, yeah, this also came out in 2009, I think about a month after the DVD. But anyway, this is what goes for quite a significant amount. I don't know why, but MGM has actually had this happen to a lot of their Blu-rays that were just, catalog releases. A number of titles like this one I was going to pick up and just never got around to, and now they're out of print. Others being like the Classic Western Veracruz, which again doesn't have a very good HD master, just like this doesn't. But the Blu-ray is now out of print, so I've got to try and track one of those down. So I definitely recommend the Blu-ray for the best visual experience if you can find one. The collector's edition DVD is also good if you can't find an affordable Blu-ray copy. And the original DVD isn't bad either if you're just wanting a cheap copy in widescreen. But again, you got to make sure you get one of these that's the corrected disc and has all of the little bits still in it. Again, it's not much. I'd have to look it up again. It's listed on like some of the really old DVD forums from around 2000 or so. So I'll have to do some more digging, but you'll have to look for a corrected disc copy of this. But and then of course there's also the Laserdisc, which again I think has the best audio track. But yeah, it's at least got some decent video releases, and at least it's got some new extras on the most modern versions if you can find them. But honestly, I wish somebody would license it, like even Arrow or somebody, because I think you could do a heck of a good amount of extras on it and talk about the backstory, the production, and do a brand new scan that actually looks good. Of course, the film's sort of inherent drab quality is not ever going to make it a stunning looking 4K scan or anything. But I think that this film and Casino Royale 67 deserve better releases than what they've got, and they certainly could provide a ton of extras. I just don't know if MGM is going to do anything. If anything, if the Bond 4K releases happen, which I'm sure they're probably going to be tied to the release of Bond 25, I would assume they would just rope in the other 2 films and just either reissue the Blu-rays that are now out of print and pretty expensive, or maybe do a new 4K scan. I don't foresee them doing that, but it would be awesome if they would. So that's just what I'm thinking about the future of the film on video. Yeah, Pete. That's the problem. MGM just decided they're just gonna let this stuff go out of print, and while they are hard up for money these days, they are still doing new scans and they're licensing stuff out to everybody, especially Kino. They license out a ton to Kino. They license out a lot to Arrow. They've licensed out to a lot of different labels. So um, I don't know why they haven't done Never Say Never Again. I would assume because now it's under MGM and Eon, and it has been included in some of the previous, complete series box sets, and some with the official films. So I guess that's probably the legal holdup, but MGM just let it go out of print. And so now you can't find it. Uh, the only Bond movies I don't own are Casino Royale 67, Never Say Never Again, and Spectre. Well, I try to pretend Spectre doesn't exist, but I finally broke down and got the I got the Blu-ray at a used shop for like $3. So at least I have a copy to then like torture myself with if I ever desire. But I just pretend like I don't have it on my shelf. It's just hidden away somewhere. And I have the other ones because I have the Bond 50 set, and I just pretend they don't exist. So. But yeah, Casino 67 and Never Say Never Again are both now out of print, and Casino 67 is has sort of the same history on video. So I've got it over on the shelf, but I have the letterbox Laserdisc that actually, I mean, it's uncommon to find, but again, it shouldn't cost you more than $10. It's got a good transfer. It has the film's original mono mix. I think the PCM mono on that disc is the best sounding release of any version. So I highly recommend that disc. It's got a nice transfer, and even though it's a Sony disc, there's no rot issues. And then that got spiffed up for the first DVD release, which also came out in the early 2000s. This is an excellent DVD. You can still find this for pretty cheap. It has some exclusive extras on it, and it does have the only official release of the original 1954 Casino Royale American television adaptation. It is missing a few minutes, so it's not complete, but it is the only official release, and it does look in pretty good quality for the source, so this is an easy way to see that. And this was the last release to have the film's original mono mix. They added a 5.1 track, and that's what's carried over ever since. And the 5.1 on this film is just not good. It's like the mono spread around. It's not really a true 5.1. And this film did get some 70 millimeter prints as far as I know, but I don't know what the stereo 6-track mix would have sounded like. This film was so haphazard in its production that despite the amazing recording of the music score, I don't know what a stereo track of the actual film soundtrack would sound like. Eventually, it got a special edition that was I think it was a 2-disc affair, had a slipcase, but I didn't get to pick that up because they pulled that and made it out of print in favor of the Blu-ray port. So this is pretty much like Never Say Never Again. The collector's edition DVD got ported to a Blu-ray, and then they pulled this Blu-ray pretty quick. Again, just a standard affair, but you can pick this one up for a decent amount. It is out of print, but thankfully the prices have not skyrocketed, at least last time I checked. I was trying to get this for the longest time. They had it at a higher price tag. Trying to get this to focus a little bit. Yeah, I got to get really close. Oh, well, it's good enough. Anyway, and then when I finally went to go get it, it had gone out of print, and I wound up paying about 10 or 12 bucks for it. So that's not terrible, and it has all of the newer extras from the collector's edition DVD. But you'll need to hang on to this DVD for the mono track, and for the exclusive featurette, and for the 1954 Casino Royale. So actually, I'd recommend just pick up the original DVD. It's still pretty cheap, and it has the mono mix, and the transfers the same good transfer from the Laserdisc, and it is anamorphic too. So this is what I usually recommend to people to start with the film, because you can still pick this up for 5 or 10 bucks. But if you want to get the Blu-ray, the HD quality it's okay, but it's not like a full out knock your socks off transfer, unfortunately, and it only has that 5.1 mix. And they have Spanish and French mono on here, but not the original mono. The new extras are pretty good, and it does have a commentary, which is a pretty nice listen. But I really love this film, and I wish everybody could easily watch it now, but of course they can't because it's gone out of print. But yeah, I'd say the first DVDs for Casino and Never Say Never Again are probably going to be your easiest and cheapest bets. But I would definitely recommend the first DVD of Casino 67, because I know it's not a film for everybody, and I would hate to recommend somebody pick up an out-of-print expensive Blu-ray only for them to hate it. So at least with that first DVD, it's a good transfer with the mono and some nice extras, and it's pretty cheap. So I'd say try and find that one if you can. Let's see what else. Let's see. Pete loves the Guy Hamilton style of Live and Let Die, Man with the Golden Gun. May not look as polished as the other 5, but the style has a lot of charm. Yeah, it does, and they do have sort of a really noticeable lower key to them. They're both also the first films to not be shot in scope since Goldfinger, and they are the last films to not be shot in scope, even though that's really not true, because if you consider the modern films, almost all of them, even though they're presented in scope 235, they were actually shot at the standard 1:7:8 ratio and just masked off. And you can actually catch some open matted television airings. And when Skyfall showed in IMAX theaters, they just showed the 1:7:8 version. So Those technically are 178, but they're just batted off to 235. But yeah, Live and Let Die and Golden Gun definitely have a lower key to them. You know, they were trying to be a bit more economical because the series was not the, you know, earth-shattering success it was during the height of the spy craze that peaked really with Thunderball in 1965. And they are very underrated, and they do have some pretty interesting set design, even for being, you know, lower key, lower budgeted films. And I love the photography in them. I do think it's kind of sad that Ted Moore basically got so ill that he had to be replaced on Golden Gun. But you know, Jeffrey, I pretty sure it was no, it was Oswald Morris came in and finished for him. And there is some great photography in there, and I'm still convinced some scenes have like a slight golden cast to them. Um, yeah, release Casino Royale on 4K. Of course, I'm talking about the 1967 pop art insane masterpiece, Casino Royale, not the 2006 one. Oh man, if they announced Casino 67 on 4K, I would literally line up outside of somewhere because that thing would look amazing. The color would just be like you cannot deny that it's not a visual treat for the eyes. The set design, the color, the costumes, and you know, and then all of the insane cameos. You know, you do get your money's worth. You know, it may not make much sense at all, but Casino 67 would look amazing in 4K. But yeah, I don't see that happening anytime soon. Um, but yeah, the modern films will be the first out on 4K, and I'm sure they're waiting for Bond 25's release because you know, there are the streaming versions of some now, and they've already like done the pre-announcement of the, you know, Daniel Craig box set of his first four. So um, it's just, are the Daniel Craig films like your real life Spectre or something? Yeah, yeah, yeah. They drive me insane. I try to pretend they don't exist, and then I feel better about myself because as soon as I think of them, I'm just like, ah, it burns. It still burns. Um, but yeah, I mean, you know, they're not the worst films in the world, and even I could admit that. But yeah, they really kill me. Um, but yeah, Casino Royale will probably be the first one out on 4K. I'm sure it's already done, and that will be an easy sell for people because that's probably the first one they'll think of for 4K. But actually, I think most of the Craig films were not finished at 4K. I know Casino was shot on film, and so was Quantum, but you know, they do have some effects in there. And I want to say I've read somewhere they were finished at like 2K for the digital intermediates. And then, of course, Skyfall was shot 2K native, so any 4K release would be a upscale from the 2K source. And then Spectre was shot on film, but I don't know what the effects were finished at. And then Bond 25 is shooting on film, and they, you know, some of the production photos show the slates, and it shows some scenes are apparently being shot in IMAX because people still do that, and I don't know why. But you know, again, they'll have digital effects, so even though they're shooting on film, there's no telling what they're going to finish at. Um, but yeah, I think people will be surprised if Skyfall comes to 4K that it's not the, you know, visual treat they're expecting because that was finished at 2K. I can't remember which cameras they were shooting with on that one. But I know Roger Deakins was giving a bunch of interviews saying, you know, he was really pleased with the quality and was fine with it being only in 2K and not shooting in 35. And even though that's a giant departure for the series, because to that point they had always shot 35. And I think they always should. I think it's an intrinsic part of the series that you can't give up. But yeah, I just try to forget about that because it just starts driving me nuts. So that I think will do it for Never Say Never Again, unless anybody else has any more comments or such. Again, I think it does hold up in unexpected ways through the years, but I don't think it's any replacement for Thunderball, especially. And I think it does have some intrinsic problems that kind of hold it back. But again, I think it's kind of a surprise how well that it actually does still play. And I think a lot of that is down to Connery's commitment and performance. So At least that's kind of how I've come to look at it. Because you know, when I was a kid growing up, and I just couldn't stand it. It's like, this is not a Bond film. Like, this is just like, you know. And I was like everybody else. Where's the theme? Where's the gun barrel? Where's you know, where's the real M? Where's the real Money Penny? Where's, you know, all of the things I've come to know and expect? Um, and that's also I don't really like some of the fan attempts, the fan edit versions that try to make like the eonized version. And I mean, I do appreciate them. I mean, it takes a lot of work, but there are some pretty good ones where they've added a gun barrel, and they've tried to add John Barry score pieces over, and replace the Michel Legrand score and try to make it more of a traditional Bond experience. But that just is really weird to me. It just makes it stick out even more that this isn't a Bond film like we usually know, because now all of a sudden the tropes that weren't in the film have now been imprinted into the film. And so I've seen those, and while I can appreciate the work to try and make that fan edit version, I couldn't stand it. It was just too weird. You know, it's really weird seeing a gun barrel instead of the crossed 007 logos. But yeah, I mean, and you know, if you guys haven't checked them out, definitely, you know, I think people have posted some clips on YouTube, so you can sort of get a feel of it. But yeah, it's a I think one of them's called "Never Say McClory Again," so it's got a funny title. But yeah, it's a really weird experience. I don't really think it's a good idea. I think it's better left as it was. But if you were ever curious, there are now at least two or three, I think, pretty good fan edit versions. So, oh hey, Strictly Sega, how's it going? Thanks for dropping in. Yeah, just talking Never Say Never Again. And oh yeah, the other thing I was going to mention, I forgot earlier, the title song. The title song performed by Lonnie Hall is very not the traditional Bond theme. It's got a very sort of lounge feel, sort of a schmaltziness, and the first time you hear it, it's terrible. But then something happens and it gets stuck in your head and it doesn't get out. And then you watch the film again and you watch it again. And then you find yourself singing the theme song in just like your day to day life. And it gets stuck in your head even more. And then a switch flips in your head and you realize you love the darn thing. So I really like the theme song, even though it's cheesy as hell. um, just something about the vibe of it and the vocal performance. Even though I think it's just totally shoehorned into the opening sequence, and that's something that even Irvin Kershner talks about in the extras and commentary. That, you know, they had planned the opening to be very direct, and it's Bond, you know, it's shown breaking into this complex, and he's taking out guys one at a time, and it's showing, you know, Sean's still got the machismo, and he's punching guys out and shooting guys with a blowgun and rappelling in using the telephone wires and everything. And they basically planned it to be very much in the same essence as the Goldfinger pre-titles, as a tight, small adventure that precedes the film and has nothing to do with it, even though that whole notion is something that was developed for the film series and something that would get them in trouble legally. That's sort of the fine line they were walking. So they were trying to do their own thing, but they kept falling back to elements of the official films. But anyway, I think he said it was the studio or Jack Schwartzman or somebody basically got this title song, and instead of having it at the very beginning, they just shoved it on top of the action opener. And according to Kirshner, it just kills the whole scene, and it really does drag down what would have been, you know, probably faster paced, uh, more tightly cut, and it's very leisurely. But that being said, there's something about the way that title song plays over those opening shots. You see Connery running in after the helicopter shot over the trees, and it's very leisurely. So I think in a way it lets the audience, well, especially the audience of 83, who had not seen Connery as Bond in 12 years, you know, it allows them to see him appear, see him start to swing back into action, but in a sort of, again, in sort of a knowing way. Like his first real close up is, you know, he pulls some of the leaves aside because he's obviously spying on this place. He starts taking out dudes one by one, and you have this strange sort of lounge song going in the background, but it really does kind of fit in a weird way. Again, it's such a strange song that gets in your head, and even if you hate it at first, you eventually start to really love it. Um, but yeah, that's something Kirshner hated about what happened to the opening, which was planned to be just a straight up action sequence. But I think it actually really works, even if it is really slow. So that's something I do actually like, and I forgot to talk about the title song earlier, but yeah, I actually think it's a pretty good song. I don't know if you guys hated it as much as I did originally, but that's okay. All right. Sega's favorite is Nobody Does It Better. Yeah, it's a great performance by Carly Simon, and Marvin Hamlisch's score for Spy is really good. I think it's very underrated, even though he did dabble into synthesizer and there is the disco emphasis. And of course, that score has never been officially released. The album was a re-recording, so that's one that and Doctor No would be the most important to be re-released by one of the specialty soundtrack labels. And La La Land has done the complete scores for Die Another Day and The World's Not Enough, and they're supposed to be doing some more because those sold well and they built up a good relationship with Eon. But I think they'll probably keep working their way backwards. They'll probably do Tomorrow Never Dies next, because they've worked with David Arnold on the last two, and that would be pretty easy to do. I don't know if they will have the rights to do any of the classic scores, because they'll probably have to go through Capitol Records as well, because most of them ended up at Capitol eventually. So there's probably some legalities to work out. So I don't know if we're going to see any of the classic scores anytime soon, unfortunately. Um, I don't know if I could pick a favorite title song of the series, though. I have so many that I love. Then there's the ones that are the classics, and then there's the ones that I think are the underdogs that I really love. Um, and again, I really do love all of the title songs of the original series. I grew up and I always made fun of License to Kill because it was, you know, much more of a R&B ballad. It didn't really feel very Bondish, but it's super dark. So I really like the darkness of that. I love the kind of slow burning quality of Gladys Knight's vocal on that. So I really love that song now. I think the most underrated are Moonraker and The Living Daylights by far. I think Aha's Living Daylights is a phenomenal song, and I think Moonraker is just an incredible ballad. And if I had to pick my favorite of the three Shirley Bassey songs, I think it's actually Moonraker, even though Goldfinger is the classic and Diamonds Are Forever is classic and sort of has that great raunchy, dark feel to it. I think I just love the emotional quality of Moonraker so much because it's so full of yearning. And but those two are my most underrated for the original series. Um, I'll Pete's talking about he thinks Spectre was trying so hard to be old school Bond and it doesn't really work well. I don't even think it was trying to be old school Bond. I think it was just trying to do the modern thing and just like throw in bits of the classic iconography, and it doesn't work that way. Like there are little nods to every film in the original series thrown all over the place. Michael G. Wilson even said that in an interview. Like if you look very closely, there's one sequence where Daniel Craig is walking around and he's dressed and basically they tried to recreate the outfit that Timothy Dalton wears after the false assassination of Pushkin in The Living Daylights, the dark shirt and the beige pants and the beige zippered jacket, and he's even walking around. I can't remember if it was Tangier, but it was a similar sort of arid city. So I'm like, oh, come on. And then they just shoehorn in Spectre and Blofeld, and they shoehorn in a train fight, and they shoehorn in all this other stuff. It just does not work. And then what was the strangest thing was seeing the end torture sequence, which it even took me a minute to realize that it's not exactly the same, but the whole setup is actually lifted from the first continuation novel, which was Kingsley Amos's Colonel's Son. And to date, the film series has never officially used anything from any of the continuation novels. So I don't know if that's why they finally decided to pull something, and Amos is technically credited for that. And so that is the first time they have officially pulled anything from a non-Fleming work. But that was really strange to see, and it felt really out of place. And it even took me a minute to realize where I'd seen this before. And I'm like, oh my gosh, did they finally pull from a continuation book? I can't believe this. It's like everything and the kitchen sink. Um, yeah, have you appeased the hipster guys by participating in this month's Criterion sale at Barnes and Noble, where all Criterion titles are 50% off? No, no, I usually don't, as much as I'd like to. You walk through Barnes and Noble normally, and they carry all these Criterion titles, and you're like, "All the things I want, I can't afford." But I usually, admittedly, I get Criterion's used, usually at about half price when I can actually afford some. And so since that usually works out to be the same, and I'm not really a big Barnes and Noble person, and it's very hard to use coupons, and a lot of people well, really, you have to read the Blu-ray forums because they go whole hog in on it, and people buy a membership and they load up their discounts and they have it down to a science. But even then, you have to go to individual stores, and not every store has everything, and some stores don't like to, do what they're supposed to do. So it's much more difficult than it should be. And Barnes& and Noble is like this about all their sales. So usually I bought a couple things in some of the Criterion sales, like titles that are just not available in the used market, or like brand new ones. Like there's one or two that I'm actually thinking about because they're brand new, so people aren't going to have used copies, or they aren't going to go on sale anytime soon. But yeah, on those, except for maybe one or two, maybe before the sale is over, I usually don't do those. But yeah, everybody goes crazy over it. They like doing their social media posts, or posting on the Criterion page. They bought all their Criterion discs and stuff, and I'm like, well, yeah, that's okay, but they do this twice a year, and Criterion's going to have their flash sale at some point, and there are other labels too, and I can't afford everything I want. And then there's a lot of Criterion discs now that I've discovered, and a lot of other people have started to point this out. They're not the best at doing disc on codes, and some of their audio tracks are not the greatest in terms of, Laserdisc audio could be better on some, but some of that's due to, studios providing over scrub masters, but then sometimes Criterion does their own work and gets a bit heavy handed, unfortunately. So there's some that I would really like that I've already read about that, and I'm like, oh crap. Like I was all set on getting the Criterion double feature of Police Story 1 and 2. And unfortunately, that's got some issues. So now I'm probably just going to wait for the repackaging non-special edition version of the Eureka British release. And they were the ones to do it first. And so Criterion basically kind of just followed their lead and released it over here in the States. But those 4K masters, while they're good, they have bad color timing from the same lovely Italian studio that ruined the Leone films. And then they had to get the correct mono tracks, and the Criterion encoding is not that good. And there's some visible compression artifacts on those releases that fans have pointed out. But then the Criterion fans are like, what are you talking about? Criterion Collection is the greatest thing ever. And I'm like, well, no, I mean, nobody's perfect. So, there are reasons why sometimes I wait to see if somebody else is going to do it, or compare extras on various releases and stuff. But yeah, as much as I'd like to just go in there and grab everything they have on the shelves, I can't afford to do that. So I think I may, like I said before, I might pick up one or two before the sale is over of like some of the brand new releases. But yeah, usually I wind up picking up Criterions at like the flash sale, or at other sites, or used on eBay, or forums, or trading with people and stuff. So I'm not one of the guys that goes in there and be like, I picked up 14 Criterion Blu-rays. I only paid $300. Isn't this great? And everybody goes, woo! And I'm like, how can you afford that? So, yeah, my hipster street cred is pretty bad. So, I'm definitely not the hipster film dude. If I go to my local art house, I always pass the crowds lined up to see the latest trendy thing, and I'm going into the random show of whatever print they got in, and there's like maybe 10 other people in there, and then I come out 2 hours later, and everybody's lined up for the next show in the same theater, and the parking lot's full, and it's a bunch of college kids and all these people, and they're there for whatever the flavor of the month is, and some will even have Criterion shirts, and I'm like, wasn't it great when Criterion didn't have the whole hipster thing attached to it? Oh well, at least we still have you guys. Um, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on that. Unfortunately, I can't really afford to go in there and just go completely Criterion mad, much as I would actually like to. But on that point, actually, every time I even pass through the local stores, even though they have the Criterion section still, it's smaller and usually is missing so much stuff that even if I wanted to buy something, everything I think of just isn't in the store, and I'd have to try and order it online, and then usually everything's back ordered online already. So it's not as easy as you might think. And I'm not just going to go in there and just buy something just because it's Criterion. Again, I would like to, but I'm not made of money, so. Let's see. Oh yeah, Pete, you can always bring up Metropolis. Fritz Lang is always welcome here. Um, yeah, the Maroda Metropolis. Yeah, it is totally. I mean, it's not really revisionist because it was really um, kind of. It's more like an art project, that then was released theatrically and stuff. It was never intended to replace the original. And I don't know if they were able to do that back then because maybe the film had fallen partially into the public domain because it is a foreign silent film. But yeah, I haven't rewatched. I've only seen it like once or twice. It is a very different beast altogether, and it is very strange. But at least it wasn't to supplant the original. So I don't think it's revisionist. I consider it more like an art project, something like along the lines of. Oh shoot, what is it? Let's see. There was the one called 48 Hour Psycho, where they simply took Psycho and they would play it in art museums, but it was slowed down to play over an entire 48-hour period. So I would kind of put it more in stuff like that, where it's sort of playing around in sort of, I mean, not really in a found footage way, but it's playing around with something of the past and trying to give it new life without, completely supplanting the original. But yeah, I'll have to rewatch that. I haven't seen it in years, but I remember it was kind of interesting for being so different. Let's see. Oh yeah, Garbage's Twine theme is great. Oh, it's absolutely great. I do think it's kind of underrated. Um, and I've kind of come around on the Tomorrow Never Dies theme, the Sheryl Crow theme. I think it's just a lot of people complain that her vocal wasn't very good, like it was kind of overpowered by the music, but I think part of that's due to the film mix. If you listen to any version of the film and the titles come up, the vocals very, isolated, so it kind of gets drowned out. But if you listen to the, CD or soundtrack version, it's fine, or the single version, so the mix is a lot better in stereo. But yeah, I've always liked the music part of that, the musical part of the song, but I've kind of come around on it. And of course, Katie Link's Surrender was originally for the opening titles and got relegated to the end titles, and is a great song. And Goldeneye is still a great song. And I'm like the one person that actually likes Madonna's Time of the Day. Admittedly, it's very different. It's totally a dance track, but I think when combined with the Danny Kleinman titles, and I think the string section on that song is what really makes it. I think it does actually, it works in some weird way, at least for me. Then again, I saw the film multiple times on its original release. I saw it opening week in a premiere DTS auditorium, and that was hysterical because the manager ran in because the song kind of cuts in and out at first, so he thought the brand new speaker system was blowing out, and the auditorium, everybody in the theater thought the sound was messing up, but we all quickly realized after about half a minute, no, it's just the song. Just go with it. But yeah, I don't know. I've never had like the massive hate for that song that a lot of people do. So I don't know. I may be the only one, but again, I think it's the addition of the string section that really works. And I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying it's as good as any of its immediate predecessors, but I think it manages to work. Um, I do think it could have been better had it not been so full on techno dance version and in the final mix, and had it been maybe a little more traditional. And I think the one really bad part that gets me is the line, Sigmund Freud analyzed this. Like, that's just a little bit too, like, what the heck is going on here? But yeah, other than that, I don't know. I actually like it, so maybe it's just me. Maybe it's because I saw it on the original run, and I think it works really well with the title sequence. So I don't know, but I actually like that one. So and it, I mean, I can kind of see what they were going for. I mean, okay, I will admit, My Name is a good song. I don't think it's perfect. I think the mix could be a little better, but it is good, and you can see what they're going for. But yeah, outside of that, I mean, Skyfall's an okay song, but I just thought it was boring. I didn't think it was very good at all. And we're just talking about the title songs. Uh, Another Way to Die for Quantum of Solace is just a mess, and they should have just not done that. They should have gone with the song David Arnold wrote for Shirley Bassey, which I want to say it's called No Good About Goodbye. I may be wrong, but if you hear that, it's very Bondian. It was eventually released on one of her solo albums, and that's the song they should have used. But of course, they didn't, and we got that monstrosity that happened. And then the less said about writing on the wall, the better, because that's the most atrocious thing ever. That was just, oh man, I felt like I was going to crawl up the wall of the theater when I heard that in full. But yeah, yeah, Sega, I know. I'm like probably the one guy that likes the Die Another Day theme song, but yeah, I got to be honest. I kind of get tired of hearing everybody say it's horrible, and I'm like, oh, it's not that bad. It's got some good stuff in it. I don't know, Pete. I'd have to dig into it and do some research, but I don't know. The Marauder Metropolis may have had something to do with starting to, sort of get the whole train of thought on proper preservation going. Maybe because it was something done to a classic work of art so completely different. But I'm sure it probably had something to do with it, at least in somebody's eyes. But it really wasn't until I mean, the whole thought process really got started, I'd argue, in the mid to late 70s, really with the advent of the American Film Institute and then Library of Congress efforts and stuff like that, when they were still working with whatever elements they had, and when they started realizing studios had junked so much and so much stuff was missing. And then it was really still more of an underground thing and an industry thing in the 80s until the advent of home video, where they could start marketing this stuff. So, really, the late 80s, early 90s is when this stuff took off. And then, especially with the highly publicized Robert Harris James Katz restorations of truly important works that, some of which they had to literally save because they were almost like totally beyond printing. But I'm sure the Marauder Metropolis probably plays a role in that somewhere, of transitioning it from being simply an academic thing that was only talked about in like select industry circles to being more of something that people actually knew about. Even though, unfortunately, now it's something people will just throw around the words restoration, preservation, and like willy nilly, and not exactly know the difference between a cleaned up video transfer and a proper restoration, and what requires that, and the steps you have to go to, and then doing it properly, because a lot of those terms nowadays just get thrown around like crazy. Um, oh yeah, Peter Jackson's "They Shall Not Grow Old." Yeah, it's he is one of the guys that will actually talk about it. Of course, the big one, of course, is Martin Scorsese and starting the Film Foundation, and he did get a lot of famous directors and producers to sign on the original charter. Kubrick being one of them, and of course Spielberg and Coppola and everybody else. But yeah, it is something that needs to be done, and it can be done. It's just usually you have to have the money and the desire. And it always helps if somebody at said studio is really a champion or a fan of a particular title to help kind of push it through the log of everything else. But Yeah, unfortunately, there's still just so much out there that's, only stuck in old video masters or old transfers that really doesn't give the full luster of what the original film looked like. But yeah, it can be done properly, and at least we do pretty well with what video releases we do get now. Even though most classic titles are never going to get to 4K, because it's just not. Yeah, the film queue line is very very long. Yeah. Um, Unfortunately, my tastes would be considered very specialized. It's not like, Universal is actually going to put out the 4K UHD of Winchester 73, even though they supposedly made a new 4K restoration a couple years ago. I believe that's probably going to come out via Criterion at some point, and of course, then only on Blu-ray because they have not yet made the jump to 4K. But I've been waiting for that ever since I heard they were going to reissue it, and it hasn't happened yet. But man, if that happened again, I would literally be lined up outside of somewhere before they opened. And again, even though that would be a Academy ratio 1950 black and white Western, it would be stunning. It still hasn't even made it to Blu-ray properly yet. So, and it looks great even on DVD. And it looks great even on the old Encore Edition Laserdisc. That's how well shot that film is. Um, and I think the higher resolutions show off best on older catalog titles, actually, because you're allowed to see more detail and things pop out a lot more to you because you're not used to seeing them in that level of quality compared to the biggest, latest, greatest blockbuster. And of course, most of those are not even finished at 4K. So even though older films may not have 4K in resolution on what you scan, you make up for the difference in everything else. So it kind of evens out across the board with the modern 2K DIs being upscaled on 4K. So yeah, yeah. The robotic Maria design is still completely iconic. You are spot on that. And yeah, there is sort of a whole. I mean, I wouldn't have exactly said it this way, but I'm sure a lot of people view it as a sex symbol. Like it is a very indicative design. And of course, there are a lot of people, and I can also understand this, that's very suggestive of the C3PO design, and I think that's absolutely true. I think George may have said at some point he was actually influenced by the Maria robot in Metropolis, and that seems pretty obvious. But yeah, it's very indicative of a lot of robot designs in science fiction from that point onward. It's very iconic. It's probably the most iconic thing from Metropolis, but so much of Metropolis has inspired and been ripped off and sort of trickled through science fiction in various mediums over the years. Whenever you have something that important and that like groundbreaking, I think that's just bound to happen, and you'll just see it pop up here, there, and everywhere. Um, wow. Two fans back in the 80s spent $10,000 to build and recreate the Metropolis robot for Forrest Ackerman. Wow. Oh man, I can totally believe that. I didn't know that particular story. I thought I knew somebody had tried to recreate it, but yeah, that would have taken a lot of hard work, especially back in the 80s without the advent of, like modern 3D printing and modern tools, where like today you read about, people building stuff in their basement and building their own prop replicas or like building those awesome lightsaber replicas. I think the really good one is literally a guy just builds them in his garage and sells them on a website. But yeah, especially back then, and especially 10 grand in the 80s. So as probably a lot more in 2019 dollars. Um, but yeah, it'd be really cool. Of course, most people would probably look at it and go, "What the heck is that?" you know? Yeah, that is crazy. Oh man, we're getting to the tough questions now. Chaplin, Lloyd, or Keaton? Man, well, since we're talking about the big three of the silent clowns, I mean, I love all three for different reasons. Chaplin has the most iconic films. I would say like he's the most well known of the figures. And, Keaton was the most underrated for a long time, but I think, there has been sort of a renaissance for Keaton, and at least he is more recognized now. And I think even less people know of Harold Lloyd anymore. And of course, there are so many other of the silent clowns, you know, aside from the big three. So, you know, those are even less known. Um, but just in general, yeah, I'd probably have to say Keaton myself. You know, simply because, you know, when he had directorial control, they were his films were, you know, it was like, again, it was like a cut above a lot of other things. They were so inventive, and you could really tell there was a brain at work, even though, you know, his famous characterization of the Great Stone Face wouldn't allow for, you know, much emotion to break through. You know, his performance would still tell you everything you needed to know, and you could tell there was intelligence at work behind the camera, which you could also tell on Chaplin and Lloyd. But something about what Keaton did has always just stuck with me. I remember I was absolutely blown away the first time I saw The General as a kid. I had read of it and I'd wanted to see it, and then I saw that and Sherlock Jr., and those just absolutely blew my mind. I couldn't believe the stuff that he achieved in silent films, and yeah, and his MGM stuff wasn't that bad either. I have let's see, I think it might be on the other shelf, but I have the I think Sony put it out, their DVD Keaton set. It's some of his later films, and you know, for all that's said about him losing his artistic control by signing away his rights on that MGM contract, um, at least, you know, for the first couple of films, they aren't bad. But they definitely don't have that spark, because he was basically just, you know, a creative force let loose. Um, and this is not to begrudge Lloyd or Chaplin, because I love them both as well. And I've been really happy that Criterion's been doing some of the Harold Lloyd classics along with the Chaplin films. So they've been slowly doing the Chaplin restorations, and the Circus is finally coming out. That's been one I've been wanting to see for a long time, because I think the Circus is a very underrated classic silent masterpiece. Maybe not have been as good, you know, as Gold Rush or Modern Times, or you know, City Lights is still the pinnacle of Chaplin for me, but I still love the Circus, and I still think it's a masterpiece. Um, and now Cohen just came out with the new 4K Keaton restorations. So I've been reading some of the reviews on those, but as great as Cohen stuff are, their releases are very expensive, and now there's like multitudes of restored Keaton presentations. So um, I was going to get some of the Kino discs, but I was trying to hold off for these new ones, and then the Masters of Cinema ones came out, and then they went out of print. So now I've got to go back to the drawing board and figure out which versions I need to actually get. I've read that the new version of because they're doing double features on Cohen. I think it's the General, and I can't remember which one it's paired with, but I think the new version of the General, some of the reviews were saying that it's got like some technical issue or something, so it may not be like a good upgrade for the price tag. What was I going to say? I was going to say something else. Oh yeah. Since we're talking about silence, really quick, I was just going to mention. Uh, this is somebody who does not get talked about enough, and admittedly came to later. I knew of the name, but if we're just talking about silence in general, this is my favorite. I am a gigantic Doug Fairbanks fan, and I think he is definitely the most underrated of all of the silence, because the sheer importance of his work, and essentially being like the first major male star, the first major action star, the first truly major romantic leading man, everything. He set the path that everybody has followed. And I don't think anybody's film education is ever going to be complete without the Mark of Zorro, the Fairbanks Robin Hood, and the Thief of Baghdad, Black Pirate, all of those. I mean, Mark of Zorro especially, because I consider that the first superhero film, and it's still a masterpiece. And as much as I love the 1940 Fox remake with Tyrone Power, it's definitely more of following Adventures of Robin Hood from 2 years before. And it's amazing to see Mark of Zorro, because that film still works. It's one of the silent films that I think you could show any child, and they can totally get on board with it and have no problem at all. And I think the Fairbanks Robin Hood is just an epic. It's amazing. I think it's the only other good Robin film outside of Adventures of Robin Hood. I think those are the two great Robin Hood films. And you know, there are other good ones, but I don't think anything has ever really compared to those two. But yeah, and Thief of Baghdad is amazing. And again, the Alexander Korda Technicolor remake is amazing. And it's amazing they were able to remake both Thief of Baghdad and Mark of Zorro and make it their own thing and make those equally classic as well. But and yeah, of course, the original Thief of Baghdad was directed by Raoul Walsh, who, in my eyes, is one of the all-time great directors and is criminally underrated. You know, because at least people might recognize Mike Curtiz's name now for simply directing like so many of the greatest films ever made. But I think Raoul Walsh was almost equally as good in different ways and was a long career journeyman. And of course, was already directing classic silence back in the day. Let's see. Opinions on live action Scooby-Doo movies. That is definitely off topic, but I will go for it. I saw the first one in the theater opening week, and what the heck happened there? I don't know. I mean, it did have Rowan Atkinson in it, so you know there was at least that. But man, that is a messed up mess. I try to forget about. I finally did see the second one on cable, and I guess it's better, but it's also just the same stupid. I mean, it's more of a Mystery Inc. story, and you don't get like the full onslaught of the stupid stuff, I guess, but it's just they shouldn't have even made a sequel, I think. It's like nobody even wanted the sequel. So even though it's, I guess, not as bad, it's just still bad. And then after that, they've been doing the like the direct to video things. Like they've done a couple live action ones. I think the last one was like the Daphne and Velma movie, but it was like uh, you know, recast as like two modern high schooler girls, and I'm like, why do we need this? Then there was that thing, Scooby-Doo: The Mystery Begins, I think it was called, and they recast it with young kids, and it was live action, and I'm like, nobody wants this. I don't think any of those have been reviewed very well, but yeah, they were just straight to video, and you know, I guess just intended to cash in on the Scooby-Doo name. Um, but oh yeah, Pete, you're fine. Yeah, I know. You gotta step away on one of these long streams. Go for it. Yeah, I'll be back. Um, but yeah, I don't know if it's something that really translates to live action very well. You know, I think if anything, you know, they had so much success with the revamp of the first direct-to-video Scooby films, with starting with Zombie's Island, sorry, Zombie Island and Witch's Ghost, and even stuff like Cyber Chase, you know, where they play around with the formula and it's a little bit darker. There's some more adult themes going around, but it's still the classic Mystery Inc. setup. And you know, those really work. I haven't seen all of the multitudes of animated video releases they've done since, and then some just sound really cheesy, like Scooby-Doo WrestleMania or Scooby-Doo Meets Kids, you know. Um, and some of the ones I've seen have just been, you know, like they're passable, but I've got to sit down one day and just watch through all of them. But I think, yeah, I was about to say Zombie Island on Blu-ray, I think is actually going to be coming up. I don't know if it'll be Warner Archive or if the main studio label will do some of them after the complete series box set. But that's being rumored so much, I'm pretty sure it's going to happen very soon. And especially since we've now gotten both the Scooby-Doo movies with some of the missing episodes, and now the complete series and some new master, I'm sure we're at least going to get Zombie Island. And then I think Cyber Chase got a Blu-ray release randomly, so I think that's the only one outside of the like super newest ones that has gotten a Blu-ray release. So I definitely think Zombie Island will happen. I think probably Zombie Island and Witch's Ghost, and then some of the more well-known ones that had more money in the production, probably. That being said, I would like a Blu-ray of those, but I would really love a Blu-ray of Boo Brothers and Reluctant Werewolf and even Ghoul School, just to have all three of the 80s films that we all grew up on the many TV airings and VHS tapes we had as kids. I remember we watched Boo Brothers so much growing up that I used to do the I guess it really was General Beauregard, the ghost of the Confederate cliche general, and I used to drive my sister crazy with it because I would be like, "No, stop, go back, leave this place." It's amazing how you remember stuff like that, but I still remember that. So I would love to see a Blu-ray of that because, of course, I've never found the expensive rare Laserdisc of those. I know some of you guys have, and I'm very envious because I'd love to see what those look like. and to check out the digital soundtracks. But I've kind of held off on picking up a lot of those on DVD because I've been hoping Scooby would start coming to Blu-ray. So now that we're getting some of those finally, I think we'll start getting some of those to trickle out. But it's probably going to be very, very slowly because Warner Brothers likes to do that to us. So um, they could easily do a box set, of like the 80s ones and then like the first 5 or 10 of the, from Zombie Island forward, and then like the next 5 or 10. But no, of course, they've got to release them separately or in multi feature sets and stuff. But yeah, a lot of the DVDs, like the DVDs for Boo Brothers, Reluctant Werewolf, even Zombie Island, they're very old. They're not very good. And, they're from the older masters anyway. So they really need improvement. Um, so yeah, I'm thinking Zombie Island might happen this next year. I don't know. It may happen by the end of this year. I don't know. They never tell us these things until like right before. The Scooby series has been a complete surprise. Like I knew it was going to happen at some point, but I didn't think we'd just randomly get an announcement. Um, at first I was like, was it because the movie set sold so much? But no, I think they probably just had it in the works for a long time. But it was just like all of a sudden it was just there, and I see this picture, and I'm like, wait, what? It's actually happening? I can't believe it. I don't know. Maybe the movies sold so much that they just decided to go ahead and move up the release or something. But yeah, it's very welcome, and technically it will be the 50th anniversary because 1969 to 2019. So maybe they were just waiting for that. I don't know. Maybe they'll do like a big 50th anniversary Scooby-Doo push and do a lot of the DTV films on Blu-ray and do some actual showings on television so kids can actually see this stuff for the first time. So hopefully we get like a big 50th anniversary push. I can see them doing that. Trying to think about what else I wanted to say. Let's see. It's kind of hard by the time I get to the 2-hour mark. I start getting a really dry throat. So if I seem to be drinking too much water, that's why. So I'm trying to remember what else I had to say. I got to start writing down topics because by the time I get to almost 3 hours in, I've kind of lost track of everything. I think the other thing I was going to say was kind of backtracking a little bit to the Batman 4Ks. I'm just really disappointed that now, it's not just 89 that got remixed, but it's also all the sequels. And again, it's more minor, but it's still there, and it just really bugs me. So even though I've now picked up the 2 of the 4, they're just going to go on the shelf, and they're just going to sit there for the time being. And I usually rewatch all 4 at some point in the year, and so I'm just gonna pull out my Laserdiscs again and be like, "Yeah, I have the 4Ks. I don't watch them ever. Don't want to, but I dutifully bought them because I bought every other release. So I have them on VHS and DVD and Laserdisc and special edition DVD and Blu-ray and 4K. And yeah, thanks, guys. This was going to be my #1 release of the year. I was so excited for these, and then no. uh, I wonder, do any of you guys have a similar thing where you were so excited for something, and then you buy it, and then it's got something wrong with the transfer, and it just sits on the shelf, and you literally never watch it, and then one day you're like, oh, I forgot I had this. So I've never watched this more than one time. Great. Yes, we are going to be getting a setup tour video. Admittedly, part of the reason why I haven't done one yet is a lot of my stuff is I'm kind of all crammed into a small space, so I've kind of got a bit of clutter going on. So I'm still trying to rework some stuff, and my basic setup is very, very simple. So I think I'm just going to give a basic overview finally, and you really, as much as you see these beautiful home theater builds and stuff, and as much as I'd love to be able to do that, I'm still at a point where space is at a premium, and I'm encroached on by shelves and things. So, yeah, I'm finally just going to do a basic one and kind of give you guys an idea of how I run things because I admittedly, even though it is very simple, it's not exactly done in a way most people do. Um, to give you a more basic idea of what I mean, I'm still using HD CRT, the XBR 960. I use that as my primary display. And even though I don't have a lot of space, I did upgrade to a 7.1 configuration. I have towers as my mains, and I set up my home theater speaker layout in a different way. Instead of just doing, I don't have all my speakers on I don't have anything on the ceiling. I have all my speakers at ear level, and I set up in more of a design for a layout of more of a recording or mixing studio. So all my speakers are actually pretty close, which does help due to the fact they don't have a lot of space. But I also did that because I like to study mix design. So then I had to do a lot of work with a sound pressure meter to get the sound levels right for each channel because everything is a lot closer. And of course, when we're talking about Laserdisc without near field remixing, things are mixed for theaters, they're mixed for speakers to be way far away. So I had to kind of play around with that a lot because, for a lot of pretty much from the DVD era onward, it's always recommended to set your speaker levels at 10 decibels difference from the standard. You're recommended to set for 75 dB instead of 85 dB, which was always the old theatrical standard. And I found sometimes you kind of have to play around with your speaker levels then if you're playing a lot of older tracks, which are not designed with that in mind. But of course, they weren't designed for home theaters and small configurations with a bunch of speakers in small rooms. They were designed for big theaters and large halls and stuff. So it did take me a very, very long time to kind of get everything sort of hammered out. And admittedly, it's nothing like really technically impressive, but I'm still, to this day, I still am pleasantly surprised by the performance I can get out of everything. And none of it actually cost me very much. But admittedly, it's, for lack of a better term, it is a very ghetto home theater. I have, instead, I don't have speaker stands, I have bar stools. But, I have, all my surrounds are bookshelf speakers. So would have to get like really substantial, big footed speaker stands that cost a lot of money. And I suddenly realized, hey, this is about the same size as a wooden bar stool. So I tried it and it worked so well that I've stuck with it ever since. I just got better bar stools. And yeah, it actually works really well. So yeah, I'm going to do for one of my next videos, I'm just going to go ahead and do a basic setup tour and show you that even you can cram a 7.1 in an HD CRT setup with Laserdisc players in a small room. It's doable. If my home theater craze has any say about it, I will cram. I always have the desire to cram a whole home theater setup in any room. People are like, "Oh, is my setup okay?" And I'm like, I know you have a bedroom, but you can still do better than a sound bar. You ever thought about at least going 5.1 in here? No? Well, you should. It's very doable. And once you go full surround, you'll never go back due to dynamic range compression. Like once you get rid of that, I could never go back after my first 5.1 setup that I built. And admittedly, it was very, very crummy. It wasn't really done exactly right, and I kept tweaking stuff around. But the first time I ever um, watched something at home and anything other with, anything other than just using the TV speakers or, hearing something on a small set of, well, even the first time I plugged in a set of speakers, like we had one of the old Sony console stereos from the early 90s, and they had the kind of boxy two speakers they come with. It was an all-in-one package. And those are kind of boomy, actually. They're very underpowered, but they're very boomy and they can get pretty loud. And the first time I realized I could route the audio from a DVD player out through, I had to do this weird bypass, and it was an old CRT, so I was having to run through a VCR. And I was able to jump it into and play stereo off of that speaker system, and it blew my mind, like just the impact of it. So I think from that point onward, I was determined to start doing that for everything I watched, and it just slowly got to be more and more and more of an obsession. But um, I mean, I do have admittedly pretty decent gear. Nothing like super expensive or anything, but most of the stuff I have is very tried and true. And I did finally switch to towers for my mains, which even though for a lot of home video tracks, a lot of receivers, you really can't run full range for everything because most uh, mid-range AV receivers can't really handle full range for 2 channels or more for running, multi-channel movie audio. Um, I was able to open those up a bit, so they run at they handle more frequency than my old bookshelves did. So I let them handle a bit more and send less to my subwoofer. And I use all my speakers; they're clip speakers, and they're all from like the late '90s, early 2000s. So they're still solid. They're still wood, and they have I mean, they're wood, but they have the black vinyl sticker veneer on them, but it's not like a modern clip speaker where they use different parts and they're not all completely built by hand. So it is kind of vintage in that way, and I do enjoy it, but none of it cost me very much. I picked all this stuff up used and just kind of went one component at a time. So 4.1 speaker setup. That would be interesting. That was, I mean, eventually that was because at first, surround on home video, you had it was mono, then it was stereo, and then the first versions of Dolby Surround had it was, oh shoot, what was it? I think it was left, right. It was left, center, right, and then no, I'm sorry, it was left, right, surround, and then they upgraded it to have the center channel. So then you had the left, center, right surround matrix that mimicked Dolby Stereo, and then eventually we got full-on Pro Logic that was better decoding. But yeah, 4.1. I've seen some people do that. But that's usually more for like having left, center, and sorry, left, right, and then rear left and rear right to do like for quadraphonic records and stuff. I would love to have like a dedicated 4.1 setup to like do straight on matrix decoding into like the exact 4 channels, because every system that's 5.1 or greater, all the decoders are like splitting the mono surround into all the rear speakers, and sometimes it tries to move it around or stereoize it and stuff. So I would love to have like a dedicated 4 channel system just for Laserdisc tracks that are matrix and stuff like that, just to try it one day. But with the good decoders and the 7.1 decoder for Dolby, which is ProLogic 2, I think it's ProLogic 2X, if I'm getting that correctly, because there's also 2Z, but I think that adds overhead channels. But 2X does a very good job at bringing the mono surround into 7.1 and not really moving it around or messing stereoizing this around that much. But yeah, one day I'd love to just have one of the really good matrix decoders and just run straight into 4 speakers just to see what that's like. But yeah, that's not really a setup that exists in modern home theater context at all. Actually, I saw somebody asking not too long ago why Batman the Animated Series, why it says surround, but it's in 2.0. People were having to explain you have to matrix it back out. And most modern releases don't set the flags anymore, so you have to manually do it on your receiver, and you have to know that there's something there. Because at least on DVDs they set the flags for those, but yeah, most people don't even know about matrixed audio anymore. I even see reviews of some discs that talk about, oh, the stereo is fine, and I'm like, that should be matrixed. And then I get a copy and I'm like, yeah, this is matrix just like it was on DVD and Laserdisc, but they don't even know that. And it doesn't even say so on the box. It just says 2.0 or something. So again, you have to know it's there. Otherwise, you're just going to always listen to it in stereo. But yeah, that's something that I've noticed has become it's becoming more and more lost in people's knowledge overall. They just don't even know that there was another form of surround. It may not be discrete, but it's there. And that's what we had for so many different things for a great number of years. But so anyway, that's me going on about audio for a bit. So yeah, I will definitely go ahead and do a room tour pretty quickly. Try to fix up some of the clutter and you know, admittedly, just to keep expectations low, it's pretty low key, but I'm still kind of amazed how I was able to get all this into one room. So uh, if my overflowing shelves are any indication, again, space is a premium. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have some of the same feelings and issues and stuff. It's a struggle. It is, but yeah. So that will be coming up next. I've got my first collection video of soundtracks in the pipeline. I'm going to finally discuss some of my soundtracks because I know some of you guys have kind of requested that and asked me to do that. So that's going to come out next, and then after that, I think I'll go ahead and do a basic room tour and setup tour because I still get a lot of questions about Laserdisc setups, and I know a lot of people do on the Facebook groups too. And everybody kind of has their own way of working it out. So I'd like to get that out there to at least show how I kind of do it, and then how I work with modern gear and with classic gear, and then especially how I run it into my HD CRT, which does a lot of great work, but then it's got a lot of intrinsic headaches with it. It's got a lot of weird quirks. So it is difficult to work with if you've never worked with one before. And I had seen some, but I had never tried any of the Sony XBR line. So it was a complete process for me to learn everything about it. And it took quite some time. Yeah, a TV on Craigslist turned into, reading manuals, reading old tech forums, asking up on AVS forums, and then about 5 or 6 weeks of calibration in the service menu. So it was a learning process. So, and needless to say, I never want to have to do a set's geometry by hand ever again because that gets very, very tiresome. But I have to say the results, especially for Laserdisc, are really worth it. So I can't talk about the Sony XBR 960 highly enough. The final HD CRTs they did, the 960, the 970, the XS955, they are amazing pieces of technology, and they still hold up if you have one in good shape. And the only thing is the power board chips do go out, but I did actually find somebody, a repair tech locally, to help me fix that, and they're very cheap to replace. But yeah, you will need help probably on doing those unless you're really good at working on TPs. But yeah, if you are interested at all in HD CRTs and interested in getting an amazing picture for Laserdisc, I can't recommend them highly enough. So I will talk quite a bit about that in a setup video because I had always read about them, and I was happy to finally find one, and then very unhappy to try and move it because it's a behemoth. But the more I played around with it, and in the years that I've owned it, I am just more and more amazed by all the stuff they're able to cram into it technologically. And even though it dates back to 2004, 2005, I think it still really holds up in a lot of ways. So part of the reason why I'm not beating myself up so much that I haven't fully gone 4K yet is the color and black levels on this set are still amazing. And the only thing I would one day love to check out a Pioneer Kuro plasma or one of the 2013 Panasonic plasmas just to finally see the top of the line plasma and what those could do. But trying to find one in good shape that's not got a lot of hours and doesn't have a panel going bad, and going through the hard part of trying to find a good one on Craigslist and stuff. Yeah, it's very difficult. It's like a needle in a haystack. So but that said, there have been a couple recently. It's like the prices are going down, but I don't know if I could find one that isn't about to die or something and is in good shape and isn't like a ridiculous amount. I might try it just to see what it looks like. So let's see. Pioneer was your first room cinema setup with 2 Sansui speakers in front corners. Oh man, that must have been fun. Yeah, Sansui made really good equipment back in the day. I know a lot of people swear by their tube receivers, and a lot of people buy and restore those and sell them for good amounts of money because a lot of audiophiles really enjoy them. And I've used some that are amazing, so I can totally buy into that. But I've actually used an old Sansui tube amplifier, tube receiver from back in the day, and it was excellent. And I've heard a lot of people say their old speakers were really good, so I can totally see that. And yeah, and especially, back in the day for your first setup, it could be really impressive, even for just, oh, I'm watching the VHS tape of such and such, but I can now crank it up, It's so amazing. I can play it loud and hope nobody's around. But yeah, once you have that first experience, you can't just go back to just using your TV or, watching regular TV on broadcast and stuff. So, I guess, does anybody else have a last minute question or anything? I think I've kind of run out of my topics and such. Um, yeah, 45 watt sheets, but you could never go higher than a third on the dial because the windows would vibrate. Yeah, isn't it funny how, older vintage equipment, even though it's not rated to go very high in terms of wattage and stuff, I mean, those things are powerful and they're built like a tank and they last. Like I've seen guys that have completely vintage setups and, they clean up and restore stuff. And I mean, you can't get that equivalent in modern gear without spending like thousands of dollars. Like I was amazed with these clipshes that I use. I inherited a set of bookshelf speakers, and they had just gotten bookshelf speakers for a home theater setup. And so I was using that for a while, and I was just amazed at how good it sounded. And these were just, bookshelf speakers and not ostensibly very fancy clipshes. So people didn't really, they weren't desirable. They weren't Klipschorns or anything, but they're heavy, solid bookshelf speakers from like the early 90s. And then I found a guy locally who, buys and flips speakers. He buys speakers and audio equipment. He was an old audio engineer, retired, and he likes to go around to estate sales and buy stuff and restore them and flip them. And he was clearing out, basically, he was clearing his garage, and he posted these Klipsch towers from about, I think they're from like the very late 90s, early 2000s. So they're rather, I mean, they're not the largest towers, but they're very substantial and pretty heavy, and they have a number of horns in them. But yeah, and just imagine the shipping cost of a single tower speaker, like even the good entry level ones, you're going to spend at least $200 to $300 per speaker. And he sold me the pair for $150. This was about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was not too far down the road even. And so I was able to squeeze them in the back of my tiny Ford, fold the back seat down, put them through the trunk and everything. And it was like I had these giant black behemoths in the back of my car, and I had to kind of duck down like this and put my seat all the way forward and drive back home like this, and then manhandle them out of the car and up the stairs and everything. But I have been amazed. I still am amazed at how good these sound. And again, they're not very well known. They're not very desirable technically, but the performance you get out of them, I can't think of a really good speaker today that I really like as much. And again, I only paid $150 for the pair of them. So, it is definitely advisable to seek out vintage audio equipment, especially locally. If you can verify the condition and make sure it's a good model, and especially if you can get stuff to match for a home theater environment, because you want to. I mean, you can mix and match brands, but it does help to follow the old idea of matching your brands. You don't have like a Klipsch left speaker, a Sony center speaker, and a Pioneer rear speaker, I mean, right speaker, because they're all going to sound like very slightly different. Um, but yeah, it is amazing what you can do with vintage gear. Um, yeah, I will, Ronald. Have a good one, man. Thanks for hanging out. Yeah, vintage stuff is the best in a lot of ways. Um, let's see. Oh yeah, Metro's talking about the Warner Brothers Hanna-Barbera universe. I know they did that big image that was drawn. It looked like sort of a comic book, but it had like a bunch of the characters, had Jonny Quest in there, and a lot of the Hanna-Barbera more famous characters. So yeah, I think they're trying to do something with the IP, technically now. And there has been talk for a while of doing a live action Jonny Quest movie, and I think now that may finally be a go, but I'm sure that's not going to be very good, because that's been passed around a lot over the past couple of years. But yeah, it seems like they're trying to do something with it. I don't know if they're going to go full on and try to do, oh, we want our own Avengers franchise with the classic um, cartoon characters, because we can build a Marvel universe out of anything. So we think. But yeah, it does seem like, we have these new video reissues now. We're hitting the anniversaries for some of these. It is still recognized by people, so it looks like they're starting to build to something. Um, Yogi versus Scooby-Doo, dawn of decent live action. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I would hope they would do something other than just the versus stuff. There were a couple of like TV specials back in the day. I remember, for some reason when I was a kid, I had a taped copy of I think it was Yogi Bear and the Spruce Goose, and it had a lot of the other Hanna-Barbera characters, and they were all interacting. And then you had some of the evil characters trying to thwart their efforts and stuff. And but it was nice to see all the various characters together. And so I would hope they would do something like that. Um, Oh, okay. There's a comic series called Scooby Apocalypse. Okay, I'll have to check that out. I know there's a lot of interesting Scooby comics that have popped up. I think there were a couple more crossovers. I think they did another Batman crossover to sort of match the Scooby meets Batman from the movie series. I know I read that one, so I'd like to check out some of the others. There's just so many comics these days; it's hard to keep up with stuff. Um, but yeah, I think they could do some interesting stuff. But I think it would be much easier and probably come across a lot better if they just stayed in animation. Uh, they're gonna kill Jackie. What? Uh, I guess that's a line from the comic then. Um, but oh shoot, I lost my train of thought. What was I gonna say? Oh man, I can't remember. That threw me. Uh, oh yeah, but I was just saying I think they could do some really good animated specials and features and things. And they've done pretty interesting work with the various animated series, What's New Scooby-Doo or Mystery Incorporated or things like that. Um, oh yeah, playing on the Martha thing. Yeah. Oh man, they do like an ultra dark, grim opening where Scooby Doo's life is shattered forever when his best friend Shaggy is brutally murdered. So then Scooby turns to a life of fighting crime as a masked dog vigilante. Oh, come on, man. They're never a fan of Scooby Doo, not even once. Uh, well, I mean, I guess if you didn't grow up with it, maybe. But it did take me a while to realize just how much the original series meant to me. Because I grew up watching it and I always liked it, but it wasn't until really a long time later, really in my teens, that I realized just how much I actually loved the original shows. And every kid loved it, but a lot of that has to do with the merchandising too, because my sister bought all the merchandise. She had the Scooby Doo bag, she had the Scooby Doo lunchbox, she had the Scooby Doo this, the Scooby Doo that, and I'm like, well, I like Scooby Doo, but I don't need all the merch. I'd like to have the show. And of course, this was before the advent of you could get almost any show you wanted in a DVD box set, which like blew my mind. I mean, it's still amazing we can do that. But yeah, I think it took me a long while to realize just how much I actually love the original show. And I mean, I'm pretty much on board with anything that involves the original writers. So that third season that was technically done a long time later, but it gets roped in with the first two seasons of Where Are You? And then some of the scrappy shows, the stuff that feels more like the classic series, but that's where they started to get away from it. I mean, I like things in 13 Ghosts of Scooby Doo. I'm happy it finally got released, and it's Vincent Price in a Scooby Doo show. He doesn't get it should be amazing, and at least that part is, again, Vincent Price's head is in a floating crystal ball talking to Shaggy and Scooby, and it's actually Vincent Price. I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. But admittedly, that show, it starts to, it just does a lot of weird stuff, and it doesn't really feel like the classic you know, Mystery Inc. that we started with. But oh wow, Metro's got 30 plus Scooby-Doo tapes and most of all the Xbox and PS2 games. You know, I've never actually played very many of them. I've seen them, but they were usually, you know, when I would look for them, you know, like in used shops, they usually are more expensive because they're kind of rarer. But I finally need to get around to that. I know, I think some of them got pretty good reviews. There's like I think there's one for the PlayStation and N64, and then there's a couple for the Xbox, PS2, GameCube era. I think maybe two or three. And actually, I think PlayStation got a couple because I remember there was a Cyber Chase game. It was like a platformer. I remember seeing that at like a store demo and dying a lot. I'm not very good at platformers. Um, but yeah, I think it's like one's like Night of a Thousand Frights, and there's a couple other ones. So I finally need to check those out. I think a lot of fans say they're pretty good, so should check those out. Oh, okay. So you do like the director's cut of Batman v Superman. I will admit I have been tempted to just finally give that a try and see if that adds anything. So I think if I ever sit through that again, I'll just do that and see if it makes any difference. But yeah, I don't know. I, I guess that, you know, if they're going to rip out like a whole hour of something, it is going to, you know, leave a mark. And you know, I've talked for years about Warner Brothers taking out 30 minutes of Batman Forever and reshuffling everything. So I guess I should at least, you know, watch the I guess like I think they call it the Ultimate Edition, and I don't know if it's actually called Director's Cut, but you know, the longer version on Blu-ray at least once, so then I can say I've done it. You know, one more Martha, 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 and then I'm done. So yeah, the people who review games are usually not fans of the yeah, especially not of the original IP, and then they probably don't have brain cells. Wow. Yeah, usually things are, especially game reviews, they get super critical. Like I've played some games I thought were great that didn't get very good reviews, and they're like, "Oh, it's a clone of this, and it's a clone of that. It's not very original." And I'm like, "Well, I mean, it's got good everything else, and it's a fun game, so you know, at least it's got that." So yeah, I really want to try those now. I still haven't played on a similar vein. I never got to play Batman Vengeance, and the other one was Rise of Sun Tzu. Those were the PS2 era games that have the animated series cast and stuff. But again, they were just never readily available, and then they're still pretty expensive in the used shops. So, I mean, they're not specifically rare, but I don't want to have to go and pay like 15 or $20 for a PlayStation 2 game. Like it should not cost that much, guys. Like you know, they'll charge 50 or $60 for an N64 cartridge because retro gaming is hot right now, and at least I can kind of understand that. But you know, for a PS2 era game, it should not cost $20 if it or more if it's not that rare, you know, or anything. So I've been waiting to find one that's at least a bit cheaper, but those are two more I've got to play. The Batman Begins game for PS2 was really good, actually. It was a bit limited for being a movie tie-in, but it was. I mean, this was still pre Arkham Asylum days, so Batman Begins tie-in game was like the best Batman game since since like forever, really. Like there had not been a good Batman game in years, and so that was a complete surprise. And that was after the Dark Tomorrow game that was so bad and glitched they never even released it on PS2. I never played that, but I've seen video footage of that, and man, that should have never been released. That was just bad. Um, oh well, you have Dark Tomorrow. Yeah, it's complete poo. Oh man. Yeah, yeah. I have Batman Vengeance for PS2. Oh man, only $10 back in 2006. That's not bad at all. Yeah, you'd be hard pressed to find it for $10 now. It's usually like 15 or 20, and I'm like, man. So I need to look it up on eBay and see if I can find a good copy of it. Yeah, it's got pretty good reviews, and it's got you know, I think it's got both Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill and the rest of the animated series voice cast. So I probably got to check it out. And then the other one, Rise of Sun Tzu, I think is like basically a sequel. And I kind of have a thing for some of the low-rated superhero games. I still love the Spider-Man 1 and 2 for the original PlayStation. Like I love the tone of them. I love the performance of Spidey and stuff. And I think those hold up pretty well. And yeah, Batman and Robin, I need to play that. I'm just amazed about they crammed in an open world concept in a PlayStation 1 game, and it just happened to be the tie-in game for Batman and Robin of all things. And it's just amazing that they tried that. It's like so beyond its means, but they were like just trying to go for broke. And I really want to try that now because Batman Forever did not. It got a port of the arcade beat 'em up on PlayStation. It didn't get a PlayStation game, um, but of course it has the. I guess it. I don't know if it's notorious or infamous, but the pretty well known and well derided Genesis and Super Nintendo game where it plays like an unending Mortal Kombat game. And admittedly, I still like to fire that up just to get frustrated because man, that is a frustrating game. Um, yeah, I really want to try the PSX Batman and Robin. And yeah, Hulk Ultimate Destruction. Yeah, I knew there were one or two Hulk games that people say are pretty good. I think that's the one that's supposed to be like a really good game. So I'd like to try that. I think superhero games, when done right, can be really fun. I think that, of course, the uh, biggest guy in the room we haven't mentioned yet is the still amazing Spider-Man 2 tie-in that totally revolutionized web swinging and gave us the open world Grand Theft Spider-Man experience we all didn't even know we wanted, but was amazing. I mean, I still fire that up just to swing around the city. And the PS4 Spider-Man was amazing. If you guys haven't played it, it is a fantastic game. The story's great. They take a lot of chances, but they nailed the tonality. I think it puts the Marvel MCU version of Spider-Man to shame. And the web swinging is very, very good. I still probably prefer the web swinging in Spider-Man 2 because you get a little bit more control and freedom of movement. But I mean, they polished the PS4 Spider-Man so much; it is a fantastic experience. Um, yeah, you get the thought. Yeah, I don't. I should do the Dos Equis ad. I don't often platinum a game, but when I do, it's Spider-Man on PS4. Yeah, that's one of the few PS4 games I've actually platinumed. So, and then I actually went and finally did all the DLC, which I usually don't do DLC, but I mean, it had its moments. It was just like adding more game time, really. But it's okay. But yeah, I also did all those and then got all the trophies for those. So yeah, that's how much I loved that game. And then in comparison, I waited like 3 or 4 years for Red Dead Redemption 2, and I haven't even gone back to it really after I finished it. I think I've gotten like 43% of the trophies in Red Dead 2, but I went back and got platinum on Spider-Man because that's a fun game. Red Dead 2 is not fun. It's just it's very slow, and I don't want to go back and go fishing for like 3 hours or something, just to get a trophy. Um, I don't know. I need to maybe do some of that after a certain point just to finally get it out of the way. But yeah, superhero games are interesting. I think there's a lot of hidden gems there, and this has reminded me there's several that I need to actually finally play, especially that Batman and Robin game. That still sounds fascinating. Like I still see sometimes people post like game footage or gameplays where they play it live, and people are like, "Wait, this is a PlayStation game? This is the Batman and Robin game? This looks like Grand Theft Auto in '98 or something." I haven't seen the Quest yet, and I didn't know for the longest time that it's got Roger Moore in there somewhere. So that's jumped on my watch list for sure. I know it's I think it's a Universal disc. I think it's their standard letterbox Laserdisc jacket. Excuse me. But I want to say I can't remember if that got a DTS disc as well, but I don't really know anything about it because I haven't seen it. But now I really want to see it because I'm like, what is Roger Moore supposed to be doing in a Jean Claude Van Damme movie? Like, I'm sure it's just like a cameo or something, but yeah, that's one. If I actually find it on Laser, I'm going to pick it up, or I just want to see it in general anyway now. But yeah, I think that's a universal disc if I'm remembering correctly. So I think it's just got a ProLogic PCM track, and I don't know if it has AC3 or anything. I think it may have a DTS version because Universal will do that. Letterbox with PCM AC3, and then they were just full on with DTS, so they wouldn't give you AC3 because they were like, we'll give you a DTS Laserdisc in like 2 or 3 years. So you'll have to wait for discrete 521. Let's see. What did I miss here? Oh gosh, yeah. If we could ever get the long cut of Batman Forever, that would be amazing. Um, and after talking about it all these years and trying to do some research to it and reading, I've read some script drafts. Unfortunately, I've never found like the actual shooting script with, all of the stuff where it should be. But I've read the comic and I've read the novelization like a dozen times. But I don't think it would ever be as in depth and as out there as the novelization. I think the comic gives a pretty good representation because it has some of the cut pieces and it gives you a better feel. And then and then there was a fan edit that replaced the deleted scenes we got and put them back into the proper place. So that also gives you a better idea. But I think you'd have to also re-edit the whole opening third to put everything back in order. I think the film would play better. I don't know. Admittedly, I don't know if it would be like 100% like a night and day improvement, and like it's a lost film because it's like seeing something you've never seen before. But yeah, the bat must die in blood on a wall in a movie for children, says Warner Brothers. So that went out. It was too dark. Uh, but yeah, I think it would make the film have a lot better reputation, and I think it would play better, and I think it should have been released that way anyway. I mean, I'm sure they probably would have trimmed it down some. I'm sure it would have been like maybe 2 hours, 15 minutes. I don't think it would have been 2.5 hours because the only person that could get away with a super long runtime in 1995 was apparently Michael Mann because he is almost 3 hours. So I don't know. Maybe the same people at Warner Brothers would have let Batman Forever run 2.5 hours. I don't know, but I'm sure had the original version been like gotten its final trim and everything, I'm sure it probably would have been like 2 hours 10 minutes, 2 hours 15 minutes. But it wouldn't ostensibly been all the stuff that was left in. It would have also been the fine tuning of the edit because I think the edit is what really harms the film most of all. But no, 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 it's not bad at all that you want to see the director's cut of an early childhood movie. Not at all. It absolutely blew my mind finding out that Batman Forever had this happen to it because I loved it as a kid and I didn't know why everybody else didn't love it to the same level as I did. And of course, I loved the Burton films as well, and I loved the animated series, and I loved the Batman '66 series because that was still in reruns when I was growing up. So even as a young child, I could recognize there were different interpretations and forms, and I kind of liked them all. But yeah, when you find out something that was part of your childhood was originally different, that can make you start to question things. Okay, Thomas and the Magic Railroad. I did not know that that had a director's cut. That's interesting. I wonder what they would have changed. Huh. Okay, let's see. I think I missed one or two more. Yeah, the Superman 2 Donner cut was a big success. I did another petition for Batman Forever getting its director's cut, and I specifically mentioned the success of the Donner cut and how well that worked, and it was well received and everything. Um, But unlike Superman 2, it would be ostensibly easy to piece together Batman Forever. You wouldn't have to really shoot anything new. It would just depend on how much of the original cut was finished in 95. You might have to massage some unfinished effects, maybe add a little bit of CG to fill in some of the gaps of CG that was not completed on shots that were removed. But it would be more of a reconstruction. Whereas Superman 2, you run into problems where you have to make new creative choices because the original film was never finished, and then it was mostly reshot by Richard Lester to get the DGA credit. So I still flip flop back and forth. If I watch Superman 2, I'll watch the Donner cut, but it misses parts that are exclusive to the theatrical version. So, I mean, you could mix and match between the two for days on end, but I don't know if you could actually create a full on workable edit of the two because I mean, I've gone back and forth. It's like a hypothetical with me. I can't figure out exactly how to bridge the gap between the two and like make one version that has enough of everything. I guess if I were to do it, it would be basically the Donner cut, but with uh, the small town being destroyed from the theatrical and one or two other things that are exclusive to that. And then the only other thing that really bugs me about the Donner cut is the line change outside of the Daily Planet when Superman says, I mean, it's an okay line. It works, but it's the alternate line of "Haven't you ever heard about the freedom of the press?" It just does not have the panache of "General, would you care to step outside?" which still makes you just go, do the little fist in the air every time because it's so perfect. So there's still some little things about the theatrical cut that are just exclusive to that. But then again, Richard Donner was never allowed to finish the movie he was working on. So you're kind of looking at a quagmire on Superman 2. So I would hope that one day they just give us a Superman 2 The Kitchen Sink Edition, Donner cut, theatrical cut, everything else on disc 3. So you can make your own because there's nothing else we can really do. Um, and we did finally get the TV edition of Superman 1, so we have most of all the stuff there. But they really should just go ahead and do the Superman Kitchen Sink edition. Superman theatrical, Superman special edition, Superman 2 theatrical, Superman 2 Donner cut, and then the kitchen sink of everything else because it was all shot originally at the same time. So again, the Superman kitchen sink edition, it would probably work, Warner Brothers. We can do it. We can work with the Saw kinds. We can work with everybody. Let's just put it all out there. It's just like a one and done. And literally, you could put in a nice kitchen sink box with a bunch of swag, except it has a little cape on the back and it has the Superman logo on it. So that's my silly pitch of the day. Let's see. Oh, Metro wants to find the late release American Pie. Yeah, I know a lot of people. Several people in the group have found theirs, but I know they paid a ton of money for it, which I know it's cool to get late releases, but I'm like, I think that's going to be pretty similar to like the DVD release. So I don't know. And I mean, I still want The World's Not Enough, so I can understand. But yeah, I know that's going to be one you will have to pay a lot for. Oh, okay. So on Thomas the Magic Railroad, they cut out the main villain and a bunch of scenes, so they made a bunch of plot holes. Okay. Uh, I want to say I've seen part of it. I remember when it came out in theaters. I remember seeing it on the theater marquee because that was still when even multiplexes would actually spell out every title of every film on the marquee. But and I was a teen at the time, and I was kind of like, well, that's interesting. They took the kids serious, and now they've made a whole theatrical feature out of it. But I think I've only seen maybe part of it. I don't know. I'm game. I'll give anything a watch. And I think isn't that the one where Alec Baldwin plays the train conductor? So and I guess I'll give it a watch. Um, Favorite Batman movie. That is a fun question, and I could give a very long, complicated answer to. Childhood favorite is Batman Forever because that was the one I just watched endlessly as a kid over and over and over. But I would also watch the animated series in its original run, and I did see Mask of the Phantasm, which was amazing, and the Burton films. It was just like nonstop Batman for me, and I just watched every version. Um, Personal favorite of the live action is Batman Returns. I mean, I don't think there's any contest. It's my favorite live action Batman film. It's the darkest. It's the most daring. It's the most bold. It has the best ending. It's the most adult. It's very messed up in sort of a wicked way. It's got all of the dark humor, the all of the inherent sexual desires of all the characters are really out there. It has Christopher Walken with an amazing, ridiculous hairdo named after Max Schreck, the actor who played Count Orlok in Nosferatu. So already it's got everything you need to love, and it has some of the most beautiful practical snow scenes of any film. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact they're using the refrigerated sound sets for the penguins. It has penguins walking around a refrigerated soundstage. And admittedly, it's a bit ridiculous when at the end, they have literal rockets attached to their backs. But um, I don't think it ever really breaks suspension of disbelief. It's not even like a Batman movie. It's like a dark adult fairy tale. It is the most Tim Burton of any Tim Burton movies, and for me, it is the best thing he has ever done, and I love it to death. And I especially love it because it takes chances and risks and is different. And I love Batman '89, and it Batman '89 I watched a ton as a kid, not as much as the others, but as Batman Returns and Batman Forever, but it just kind of sank into my psyche, and I would just quote it all the time. I still do without even realizing it sometimes. And I think it's such a brilliant movie that it doesn't get people talk about it being so successful. People will talk about being the first big Batman movie, and I mean, they might mention that it's important for comic book films, but they don't really get into how important it and Superman 78 are. But I don't think it gets the credit it deserves creatively. People will talk about the production design, yes, and they now talk about Keaton in a positive light, and they maybe mention Tim Burton, but they don't talk about the character subtext. They talk about Elfman's score for the fanfare, but they don't talk about the incidental stuff. They don't talk about the photography. They don't talk about the sound design, which I really love the use of old timey sound effects libraries, and it really kills me that's now been removed on the 4K. So I really think '89. I love '89 Returns and Forever. I love them to death. I love Mask of the Phantasm, and it's probably the best Batman movie for doing Batman right. Still to this day, it is the definitive Batman movie that we've gotten for doing the Dark Knight detective, doing the Bruce Wayne character right. It's got scenes of great emotional power in it, and it was ostensibly originally designed to be a 75-minute direct-to-video tape release for children, and yet it's the best Batman movie we've ever gotten. And so that says something in an ironic way, I think. But I think it still is the best single representation of Batman in a feature film that we've ever gotten. That being said, if I had to pick my own personal favorite, and I know this has gotten really long-winded, I would flip-flop between Phantasm and Returns. I think Returns is the best live action. Phantasm is easily the best animated. But I could go with either one as the best Batman film overall. And I love the 1966 feature. I think that is an inspired film, and I think it has some of the best ideas of the series. They made it in between the first two seasons where things were still fresh, and they had more time and money to play with. So it's like the super two-parter episode of the series we never got. And for many years, I just watched that religiously as a kid over and over and over and over and over again because you just couldn't see the series unless, somebody was going to run it. TV Land ran it when I was in high school, and I would literally rush home after high school to try and catch an episode just because I was so excited I could finally see the '66 show instead of just watching the movie over and over. And I love the movie to death. So I love that one as well. And I've come to terms with Batman and Robin, so I just try to laugh with it and groan with it every time I watch it. It's like you get to a point where it's like it's coming, and you wait for it, and you wait for the bad lines, and then you just shout the ice puns with Arnold as it goes along, or you wait for it, and you're like, I don't think they have fax machines and elephants, Uncle Alfred. You know, it becomes like a tried and true, treasured dead horse to beat. The bad stuff in there, and once the bad production history it had, and the short schedule, and having to work and do what the toy companies said, it was doomed from the start. So, there are worse films. It's not the worst film ever made. And eventually, I think you can come to a point where you can kind of laugh with it because you know how bad it is. That's at least what I try to do. So, yeah, that's my favorites in a nutshell. I told you it was a long-winded, complicated answer, but yep. Oh yeah, Superman 2 is super inconsistent, and I was the same way as a kid. I loved parts of it, and I thought it was a good movie, but there were parts I really didn't like that felt like they were from a different movie, and even the look changes. Like the photography itself changes because, there is original Donner footage in there. And then there is original scenes that Donner shot that then were scrapped, and Richard Lester went back and reshot because he had to shoot 60% or more to get the credit, and Donner had shot, about 75% of Superman 2. And so, it's really strange, and that it really holds the movie back. So even the original theatrical release, I don't think is really as good as, I mean, it's not as good as it should be. And I mean, it was reviewed pretty well, but I don't think the full scale of the whole production troubles had gotten out. And I think if it had, it would have made a lot more sense to people, because even if you don't know about this stuff, you see Superman 2 at any age, it feels weird the first time, especially coming after the first one. And yeah, there are parts that look cheap. Like I've always thought the all the scenes of the honeymoon suite and the Niagara Falls Hotel. I mean, yeah, it's supposed to be like a chintzy room, but it just looks cheap and looks awful. And there are other parts from the reshoots that have never looked good to me, like even the effect of Superman's mother in the crystal that is in the theatrical version to replace Brando because they didn't want to pay him to reappear. That just looks weird. And the worst part for me is the terrible voice impersonator they got for Gene Hackman, because he refused to come back and loop his lines because he was standing in solidarity with Richard Donner. Margot Kidder did the same thing, which is why Lois Lane is not in Superman 3. Salkinds kind of did that because they were mad at her for siding with Richard Donner. But that's why if you watch the theatrical cut of Superman 2, only the scenes Donner shot have Gene Hackman's actual voice, and then every other one cuts to this gravelly voice. And as soon as you notice it, you can't unhear it. And it's like, I think his fortunes of solitude is over here. Look at these crazy crystals. I put one here. Hi, I'm Lex Luthor. I'm like, no, that's terrible. Uh, but yeah, that is. Yeah, it's still. I don't know if you could ever fix Superman 2. Um, yeah, I mean, Thomas the Tank Engine was still on when I was young, but I never really watched it all that much. But it was on, and I knew of it. And now I remember, that's why I remembered it, because Ebert did give it a 4 out of 4 star, a 4 out of 4 star rating. I remember people were like, "Why does he give that to a kids movie?" And I remember reading the review, and it was a good review. So I'll have to look that up again. I really want to see that, because I know he also did the same for Babe 2, Pig in the City, and I know a lot of people really like that. And George Miller directed that, of all people. So I saw part of it once, but I've always meant to actually go and see that, to actually see if it's really that good. Um, oh, really? I could have sworn I maybe I'm pretty sure Ebert gave the Thomas movie a good review, and I may be totally wrong, and I'll have to look it up once we're done. But I remember, I think he took some flack for it because he gave a good review to a children's film. I could be totally misremembering this, because I know he did that for Babe Pig in the City, and he was like the only one. But I know there's people at the time, people nowadays, who actually say the same thing. So, but yeah, he did give Superman 2 a 4 star review, and I have read that, and it does talk about the good points, but it doesn't pick up on the bad ones, and doesn't talk about, oh hey, I'm gonna rip the letter off of my my costume, and it's gonna turn into a magical piece of saran wrap and like and trap the villain in a magical Superman piece of saran wrap. Like what? Uh, yeah, I think the reviews were mixed, but I don't think they were really negative. I think they were still pretty good. The reception was good, and it still made a good amount at the box office. But it wasn't all like the first film, and I think people were intrinsically feeling the problems on Superman 2. Well, yeah, yeah. Sometimes you get those movies that are just designed for kids at a certain age, and there's nothing wrong with that if it does what it's supposed to, and it's actually intelligent enough, and it's not you know, something that's just really stupid. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. But of course, it's never a children's movie is never going to be taken seriously. Um, you know, if you go back to the studio era, there were films that were designed for children, but they were, you know, still, you know, acceptable as dramas. I think that's how they kind of got around that back in the day. And so some of those are kind of more acceptable now because now they're not just children's films, but they're also dramas and they're also family dramas and they're also classics. So they fit under multiple labels. But you know, like the first couple Lassie films or National Velvet or uh, there's so many like the film version of The Yearling or you know, there's a lot of different ones like that. So at least those have a bit more of a prestige to them. Okay, yeah, I'll definitely check it out at some point. Yeah, all you have to say is something has good model work, and I'm like, okay, I gotta watch that. I'm a sucker for great model work, so absolutely, I will definitely check that out at some point. Yeah, I will admit there have been times where I'm like, you know, I would just love to go and see everything that Derek Maddox ever worked on, or you know, any of the great effects pioneers and great model technicians, and then there are some things I've tried to see simply because Willis O'Brien worked on them, or and then I really want to see all of the Harryhausen films. I've seen a good number of the famous ones, but there's still a bunch that I haven't seen, and you know, that's a level of artistry we won't see again. Um, no, no, no. You can't be too tough on a children's movie because usually they have more limited scope and scale and things. So yeah, you know, it is what it is. Yeah, I'm not too harsh on something if you know, I always try to give credit where credit's due. So no worries. Well, I think I've about talked myself hoarse, so I think I'm going to call it a night now. Uh, yeah, it's harmless. Absolutely, absolutely harmless. Uh, but yeah, I think I'm going to call it a night. I want to thank everybody for hanging out with me and talking some 83 Connery fun. And I think maybe we'll keep this going. And next week we'll just make it a Casino 67 night. So let's try and keep on that theme because I could talk about Casino 67 for days on end, and I'd love to talk about it some more. So yeah, we'll make Casino 67 next week's movie. So see it if you can. I don't know if it's on any streaming services or anything, but we'll talk some Casino Royale 67 next week. So have a better one, everyone, and keep having fun with physical media. Have a good night, everybody.